Lucifer means Lightbringer presents the mythical astronomy of ice and fire. Live podcast. The Blood of the Other, Part 5. Ice, Moon, Apocalypse. With special guest, Ideas of Ice and Fire.
All right. Hey there, everyone. I've got no idea if what you guys just saw or if that went according to plan, but hopefully it did. Yes. The flying capes. I don't see anyone complaining about messed up music or visuals, so I think that worked. Yes. And no, I'm not using a green screen. This is a cool little template that I made, and I'll go ahead. Let's go ahead and get the yeah, they were out of sync a little bit. I know. It's yeah, it is what it is. Are you, let's see here. Am I sounding okay now? Yes. Voice and video does not match. All right, let's see if we can. How we doing now? Out of sync still. Maybe that's because I'm using the okay, I know what I have to do. All right, hang on a second, guys. I can get this working. I'm going to close down the XSplit. I was using the XSplit to give you that lovely intro, but it's creating a lag getting to the Hangout screen, it looks like. So let me go ahead and switch over to my camera so you can see my lovely face again with my new C920. And, oh, it's not letting me take the camera. Why not? Oh boy. All right. 1 second, guys. Oh, there we go. Hey, everybody. All right, I'm here, and hopefully we've got everything in sync now. And let's go ahead and say hello to my partner in crime today, which is Quinn from Ideas of Ice and Fire. Say hello, Quinn.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm looking forward to reading all these quotes today. It's going to be fun. Check me out on my YouTube channel, Ideas of Ice and Fire.
And as you can see, Quinn's got he's got his screen share set up so that he will actually display the quotes that he is reading. So it'll be something of a interactive kind of affair with visual aids and stuff. Still a slight lag. Well, I don't know what to do about that at this point. It is what it is. So there's not a whole lot I think I can do about it. I'm going straight in, so maybe try hitting the refresh on your YouTube page, but I don't know. It seems like it's probably on my end. Okay, guys. So this is going to be a live podcast. I wrote this podcast more than a month ago. I've been excited to bring it to you for a long time, but unfortunately, because my computer went down, I did not want to try to do all the audio editing on a backup computer because it would just be a nightmare. And so, by circumstance, here I am trying to do something very ambitious, and it's going to be a bit of an endurance match. So we'll see what happens, and I'll get through. I think I can get through the whole thing. Hopefully I won't break down and fall short. What do you think, Quinn?
Yeah,
you'll be able to
I think you'll do pretty good.
All right. So I'm just setting up my recorder here so I can record a clean audio take of this. Yes, looks good. All right. All right, guys. Welcome to Blood of the Other Five Ice Moon Apocalypse. And I did change the name at the last second because I felt like it used to be called Snow the Moon Called Down, which is a line from the story. And I always liked using lines from the story, but it was a bit overly poetic. And I felt, let's go for the more direct name, Ice Moon Apocalypse, because that is what we are doing. So hey there, friends, patrons, YouTube viewers, podcast listeners, and fellow mythical astronomers all. It's your host, LML, and it's time to talk about the end, at least the beginning of the end, anyway. It's finally time to discuss the possibility of a new moon meteor incident and a new long night. It's been suggested right from the start, actually. My first episode, which began as an essay before there was such a thing as the Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire podcast, began with a famous quote from Dorea about a Carthene legend of the second moon, which ends with a prophecy. One day, the other moon will kiss the sun too, and then it will crack and the dragons will return. Now, while we've seen fire-breathing dragons return, I think it's pretty obvious when you look at it a little closer that this Carthene prophecy is actually talking about the meteor dragons returning. Think about it. Dragons only disappeared from the world about 150 years before the present day. 400 years ago, the doom of Valyria killed off most of the Valyrian dragons, but before that, the Valyrians had control of dragons going back at least 5,000 years when they wiped out old Gis with their dragons. And even before Valyria, people in Ashai probably had control of dragons. This Carthene prophecy, however, it's got to be centuries old. I mean, it's more than 400 years old. And so it would be older than the Doom, which means that when it was written, there were dragons in the world. Therefore, it doesn't really make much sense for the prophecy to speak of dragons returning unless they're talking about the kind of dragons that come from the moon, the kind that only come once every 1,000 years or so, or every several thousand years, when one of those moons kisses the sun. So when the prophecy says that one day the other moon will kiss the sun and the dragons will return, it's actually nothing less than a prophecy of a future moon disaster and another moon meteor attack. And it's right there in Dany's 3rd chapter. It's actually pretty meaningful that this apparent prophecy of lunar doom comes halfway through the first book. It means that it's something Martin has been planning the whole time, which makes sense. Something that big as a part of the ending would really have to be planned out from the beginning. As we'll see, the foreshadowing of the Ice Moon Apocalypse has indeed been laid out all throughout the series, just like all the other main events seem to be. And one of the most common questions that I get asked is some version of, but how will we know if moon meteors cause the long night? Well, there are a few ways we could get verification. We could see a brand vision of the hammer of the waters dropping like a falling star. We could uncover knowledge in Ashai, in some old books that Sam might or we might find it in old books that Sam might find at the Citadel, that sort of thing. But one of the best confirmations that the moon meteors caused the original long night, if moon meteors caused the new long night, of course. I mean, it makes sense, right? We all know a new long night is coming. So if it's just a matter, it's just a matter of how it was triggered or how it will be triggered. If meteors trigger the first one, it figures that they would probably cause the new one, right? I mean, you'd think a meteor attack might be too spectacular for a Song of Ice and Fire, too distracting. But again, if we all know a new long night is coming, then we can basically just think of the meteor impacts as a very spectacular and symbolically meaningful mechanism to achieve that. In a series full of Chekhov's guns, the biggest gun of all is the impending invasion of the others, right? I mean, it's been set up since the prologue of A Game of Thrones that the others will once again invade Westeros and cause everyone a lot of problems. In the books, the others are actually like vampires. They really can't come out during the day. Now, it's kind of glossed over on the TV show, where they just sort of have a cloud follow them around and it gets kind of dim. But in the books, to truly invade Westeros, the others need a true long night, with the sun hidden during the day and winter taking firm hold. So what I'm saying is that something has to hide the sun. So what could that be? If my main theory is right, Martin has already solved this problem once. He used moon meteors. So is he really going to come up with a whole new way to hide the sun? I don't think so. It makes more sense to have the other moon kiss the sun in order to have the dragons return, just like the prophecy says. He's really left the reader with this long trail of clues, and I mean, what, 30 podcasts long, about a moon meteor impact causing the original Long Night. I mean, it sure would make a lot of sense to put some sort of big payoff at the end, right? People who didn't see it coming will look back in search of foreshadowing, and there will be plenty to find, as you all know. So much so that everyone will be saying, why didn't I see that coming? Just as everyone did with the Red Wedding, which, although shocking, in hindsight was amply foreshadowed. Now, after today, you will all be in on what I consider to be this ample foreshadowing of the ice moon apocalypse, which is indeed headed our way. And I'll just stop for a second to acknowledge a super chat from Crowfood's daughter. Thank you, Crowfoods. If you guys do want to send in super chats to cheer me along, I, of course, will appreciate it, and I will probably acknowledge them at the section breaks as I go. So there it is. All right, so we've actually been seeing this ice moon apocalypse coming for a while now. After all, we've been talking about the dragon locked in ice for several episodes, and we've found this symbolism everywhere that ice moons are symbolized. And what's the fun of locking away a dragon in a cold prison if you're not going to wake that bad boy up at some point? What does it mean for a dragon sleeping inside the ice moon to wake up? Sounds like an explosion, right? The last time the moon, the last time one of the moons was like an egg, it had to crack open to birth dragons. And I think that one day the other moon, quote unquote, will indeed crack open so that the ice dragon can wake. Now, more than anything, the dragon locked in ice is a symbol of dead Jon, his body growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him at the wall, as Bran sees in his coma dream vision. And Jon, of course, is not going to stay dead. Sorry, Sir Hunts. He's going to wake up, quite possibly with the aid of magic, fire, and blood. Now, as we've covered many times, Jon's symbolism is that of an ice dragon and of dragonglass. So think about dragonglass for a minute. It not only represents the concept of frozen fire, like the dragon locked in ice, growing cold, but also the potential for that fire to be reborn, because Quaithe speaks of, quote, waking fire from dragonglass. So dead and frozen Jon, with his corpse likely to be stored in an ice cell of the wall, is the dragon locked in ice, and he's most strongly symbolized by dragonglass, and accordingly, his resurrection can be thought of as that dragon locked in ice, waking in fire. So we have these parallel symbols, a moon with a frozen dragon inside that needs to wake, and Jon as a frozen dragon inside the wall. The wall parallels the ice moon, if anything does, something that we'll explore in detail today, and thus we can see that Jon waking from his deathly slumber is symbolically parallel to the idea of the ice moon cracking open. If Dany played the role of the fire moon that cracks open to birth dragons at the alchemical wedding, then Jon is kind of like the frozen dragon inside the ice moon waiting to hatch. And we're going to see that symbolism depicted in a myriad of clever ways today. Now, we left off the last episode with a great ice moon apocalypse foreshadowing, the burning of the whited Night's Watch ranger named Othor in Mormont's chambers. Now, the mechanics here are simple. Othor is described as having the standard blue star eyes of all whites, excuse me, the standard blue star eyes of all whites and white walkers, and most notably a moon face in this line.
The hooded man lifted his pale moon face, and Jon slashed at it without hesitation. The sword laid the intruder open to the bone, taking off half his nose and opening a gash cheek to cheek under those eyes like blue stars burning.
So here we can see clear crack across the face of the moon's symbolism, with the sword being like a comet. Now, this could be either the original Blackfire moon meteor becoming embedded in the ice, or it could be a depiction of the comet that is hypothetically coming to hit the ice moon in the future, because they're largely parallel events. They both involve flying space rocks slamming into the ice moon. Now, I believe that this Jon slashing the white across the face would be the initial strike, as there's a more explosive event coming in just a minute. But either way, we can easily see the basic idea of what's happening. Martin is showing us a moon-faced man full of ice magic energy getting slashed across the face with a sword. And the man wielding the sword is one of our flaming sword heroes. Now, the more important part comes with the burning of the Ice Moon Man, where, quote, the fire had caught in the dead man's clothing and consumed him, as if his flesh were candle wax and his bones old dry wood. And its face was, quote, surrounded by a nimbus of fire, hair blazing like straw. These quotes basically merge the Wicker Man, King of Winter symbolism, with the Ice Moon face symbol, and in the form of an undead Night's Watchman. And of course, this has Jon written all over it, as he's a King of Winter figure and a Night's Watchman who is dead and symbolically trapped in the Ice Moon after he dies at the end of A Dance with Dragons. Now, of course, Jon later sees the whited Othor wearing Ned's face in his dream, which further cements Othor as playing a symbolic King of Winter Stark role. If Jon wakes through some sort of fire magic ritual, then he will be mirroring his brother Othor, and I think something like that could definitely happen. All right, got the cough button working. Okay, so the thing is, this scene isn't just foreshadowing us, or isn't just showing us foreshadowing of the frozen Jon. Yeah, so that sentence over. The thing is, this scene isn't just showing us foreshadowing of frozen Jon waking in fire. It's also showing us a disaster involving the actual moon in the sky. I'm pretty sure. I mean, you don't leave a crack across a star-eyed moon face and expect us not to think about astronomy in this story. Indeed, in this same A Game of Thrones chapter, Othor's frozen moon face gives us some great ice moon apocalypse foreshadowing as it tries to kill Jon. Its face was against his own, filling the world. Frost covered its eyes, sparkling blue. Now, when the ice moon is, quote, filling the world, I think that's a bad sign. It sounds like a moon, or a moon meteor perhaps, falling like a blue star, rapidly getting closer to the world and filling up the sky. And of course, this all happens after he is slashed across the face with a sword. Now, you may recall that there is a parallel scene to this one, and it's the scene, of course, with Sam fighting an ice white, just like Jon was. And the language is much the same. The world stars, terrible crushing pain, and a cold so fierce that his tears froze over his eyes. Small Paul's face isn't called a moon face here, but this quote reads exactly like Jon's does, as a description of blue stars getting closer and closer and filling up the sky. And like Jon, and most importantly, Sam sets the white on fire, just as Jon does. And you'll even notice that Sam has ice eyes in the scene. That's one I missed last time. Samwell Ice Eyes, the Slayer. He's also got puffs of frost exploding from his mouth in this scene, which makes him sound kind of like an ice dragon breathing cold. Hat tip to Archmaester Emma for catching that one. Thanks, Emma. Anyways, I've noticed a little snippet of this scene, or rather, I've quoted a little snippet of this scene in the last episode because Small Paul had a snowbeard. But I've been saving this entire quote for just this moment. Now, this will have the most impact if you've listened to Weirwood Compendium 4, In a Grove of Ash. But if you haven't, the basic idea here is that Melisandre speaks of Azor Ahai's rebirth by saying, even an ember in the ashes can still ignite a great blaze. And there are a whole series of scenes where an ember in the ashes of a fire is functioning as a symbol of Azor Ahai inside the Weirwood net awaiting rebirth. Now, weirwoods are modeled after Yggdrasil of Norse myth, which is believed to be an ash tree. So the idea of a fiery thing or person being in the ashes is also a clever bit of wordplay about a fiery person being inside an ash tree, which in A Song of Ice and Fire means inside the weirwood. So with that said, here is Sam burning the white.
His fumbling fingers finally found the dagger, but when he slammed it up into the white's belly, the point skidded off the iron links, and the blade went spinning from Sam's hand. Small Paul's fingers tightened inexorably and began to twist. He's going to rip my head off, Sam thought in despair. His throat felt frozen, his lungs on fire. He punched and pulled at the white's wrist, to no avail. He kicked Paul between the legs uselessly. The world shrank to 2 blue stars, a terrible crushing pain, and a cold so fierce that his tears froze over his eyes. Sam squirmed and pulled, desperate, and then lurched forward. Small Paul was big and powerful, but Sam still outweighed him, and the whites were clumsy. He had seen that on the fist. The sudden shift sent Paul staggering back a step, and the living man and the dead man went crashing down together. The impact knocked one hand from Sam's throat, and he was able to suck in a quick breath of air before the icy black fingers returned. The taste of blood filled his mouth. He twisted his neck around looking for his knife and saw a dull orange glow. The fire. The only ember and ashes remained, but still, he could not breathe or think. Sam wrenched himself sideways, pulling Paul with him. His arms flailed against the dirt floor, groping, reaching, scattering the ashes, until at last they found something hot, a chunk of charred wood, smoldering red and orange within the black. His fingers closed around it, and he smashed it into Paul's mouth so hard he felt teeth shatter. Yet even so, the white's grip did not loosen. Sam's last thought were for the mother who had loved him and the father he had failed. The long hall was spinning around him when he saw the wisp of smoke rising from between Paul's broken teeth. Then the dead man's face burst into flame, and the hands were gone. Sam sucked in air and rolled feebly away. The white was burning, hoar frost dripping from his beard, and the flesh beneath blackened. Sam heard the raven shriek, but Paul himself made no sound. When his mouth opened, only flames came out, and his eyes, it's gone. The blue glow is gone.
Fire mouth. Always a bad thing. All right, thank you, Quinn. That was a lovely reading. Let's see, both Sam and, okay, let me actually stop and make a note. If any of you guys in the chat are making questions or comments, I'm not going to stop and grab them now, of course, but I will be watching back this entire thing and looking at the chat on the rewatch. So feel free to drop any questions or comments and know that I will eventually see them and, get back to you. So in any case, both Sam and Jon's white fighting scenes also involve the same 1-2 sequence. Jon and Sam first stab the white ineffectively, Jon with his sword and Sam with his dragon glass knife, and then they both have to turn to fire as a second, more effective weapon, with Sam even thinking and reaching for his knife as he grabs the ember to shove in Paul's mouth. Now, in my estimation, this is these two, the first weak strike and then the more effective strike are depicting the two strikes on the ice moon. The first bit of ice moon meteor shrapnel that would have hit the ice moon in the ancient past, and then, of course, the more spectacular #ice moon apocalypse to come. The charcoal that Sam picks up, red and orange smoldering within the black, seems like a pretty terrific red comet symbol, of course. And as I mentioned, the ember in the ashes motif is trademark rebirth of Azor Ahai language. So in both scenes, we have a dead Night's Watchman held prisoner by the blue ice magic of the others. First Othor and now Small Paul, and in both cases, they're set free by a heroic Night's Watchman wielding fire. Just as I said that Othor actually symbolizes Jon, the same would be true for Small Paul here. And again, I'll point out the hoarfrost dripping from his beard language, which makes him a Snowbeard figure. Now, as you recall from the Eldrick Shadow Chaser episode, all of the Snowbeard figures have heavy parallels to Jon. Most importantly, the ember in the ashes does indeed spark a great blaze here in Small Paul, and it represents the rebirth of Azor Ahai from the ember in the ashes, just as Melisandre says. Again, we should think of Jon coming back to life as Azor Ahai reborn, emerging from his icy prison in a display of fire, but only when, quote, the world shrinks to 2 blue stars, or when a star-eyed moon face fills the world. Thus, we can see another layer of the Carthian prophecy about the other moon one day kissing the sun too, and the dragons returning. The moon meteor dragons will return, yes, but so will Jon, the ice dragon. After all, in terms of symbolism, these are parallel events, and that's kind of the theme of this episode. So this leaves us in the ultimate sweet spot for analyzing A Song of Ice and Fire, the intersection of awesome world building and the heart in conflict. The blue, very personal so far, very much focused on the many characters who fit this stolen other archetype. But now it's led us to an episode about the potential for a #ice moon apocalypse. Take a shot. That's about as far away from the heart in conflict as possible. We're literally out in space, talking about magical flying hunks of rock. But of course, that's the beauty of mythical astronomy. The flying hunks of magic space rock always parallel the humans and their hearts in conflict. So here's what we'll do today. We're going to look at the two most important symbols of the ice moon, Winterfell and the Wall. As we visit these places, we'll be simultaneously comparing them to Jon and the Ice Moon. It's the same thing we did when we went to the Wolf's Den at White Harbor with Davos, and indeed, Winterfell and the Wolf's Den have many parallels, as we're about to see. All right, guys, I need to plug in my computer because the battery's running low. 1 second. How am I doing, Quinn? What do you think?
I'm really enjoying it so far. I think it's going pretty good.
Anything interesting in the chat?
Everyone's saying hi to me. It's great to see all of you guys. It's nice being on this channel. LML's been on my channel a few times, as a lot of you probably know.
Yeah, it all came together for me when you told me that you liked having me on your channel because I talk a lot. I was like, oh, now I get it. He just lets me go on and on and on. Seems cool with it. I guess, I don't know. I like this guy.
Yeah.
Guess we have a complimentary relationship.
Yep.
Well, you know what? The cool thing about not speaking as much is when you do speak, everyone listens and pays close attention. So
yeah, that's good.
You're like Bruce Bolton. All right. So we so here's I must let me cue up my patron music. I'm doing the best I can with a pretty jerry-rigged system here. I'm like piping in audio from one computer, and yes, so first of all, I must apologize to all my new patrons that have signed up in the last month. I told everyone that I was going to make the new nicknames and read them today. However, yesterday was crazy and this morning was a disaster. So if you have signed up in the last month, you will be hearing your name on the next episode, or perhaps even I'll get you in the Q&A live stream next weekend to follow up on this one. So today I'm going to read some of my classic patron names and know that I love and appreciate you all. So with that said, Ice, the Hell Locked in Winter. This section is brought to you by our Long Night's Watch patrons, Gustav Rasmussen, Sharon Ice Eyes, Dread Ferryman of the North, wielder of the Staff of the Old Gods, a Weirwood staff banded in Valyrian steel, and Sinxia, Frozen Fire Queen of the Summer Snows and Burner of Winter's Wick, Antonius the Conspirator, the Red Right Hand of R'hllor, Knower of the Unknowable, Dispenser of Final Justice, and Blue Raven of the Lightning Peck, the Frozen Thunderbolt, whose words are, "The way must be tried." All right. And fade out. Cool. Thanks, patrons. That sound okay, Quinn?
Sounded good.
Excellent. Okay, just making sure I have control of my audio and video. All right, and Tom Cruise, no, I'm not totally high. Actually, I refrained this morning because I'm trying to, got a lot going on. So I'm actually fairly sober as it goes. And it's also like only 1 o'clock, 12:30 on the West Coast. So, try to keep it under control there. 4:20, All right. So Jon is the epitome of the dragon locked in ice, symbolized as a person, and Winterfell is the epitome of the dragon locked in ice as a place. It's like the Wolf's Den, only better. Winterfell being the Wolf's Den of all Wolf's Dens, naturally. Just look at this place. Winterfell Castle is a hunk of dark stone surrounded by white snow, and this image is mirrored in their sigil, a gray direwolf on an ice-white field. A direwolf locked in ice. You better believe it. And we'll talk about the symbolism of the direwolves in a moment, but there's actually extensive symbolism of a dragon locked in ice at Winterfell as well. Let's talk about the locked in part first, that is the prison symbolism. Just as the Wolf's Den is a prison, Winterfell is described as, quote, a gray stone labyrinth, language which also implies the labyrinth of Greek mythology, which was a prison for the Minotaur or Minotaur. Winterfell is also described as a monstrous stone tree, which also implies the Weirwoods, which are prisons and traps, aka weirs, for green seers, and whose bark turns to stone, so stone tree. Similarly, the wolf's den is a prison too, and one that also has weirwood symbolism, such as the fact that it contains the castle Godswood with its fat and angry heart tree, and also the fact that the jailer in the prison is, of course, a twisted dude named Garth. Back in Winterfell, in A Clash of Kings, a now crippled Bran sits at the window seat of his chambers and thinks...
Bran had preferred the hard stone of the window seat to the comforts of his feather bed and blankets. A bed, the walls pressed and closed, and the ceiling hung heavy above him. A bed, the room was his cell, and Winterfell his prison.
Minotaur, I am being told. And everyone is telling me I'm high as a kite. I'm not, but if you want to believe that I am, you can. That'll make it more impressive. So it's not just Bran's prison, of course. Recall this famous line from Ned and Robert's scene in the Winterfell crypts in A Game of Thrones.
By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell, to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. The oldest and long ago had rusted away to nothing, leaving only a few red stains where the metal had rested on stone. Ned wondered if that meant those ghosts were free to roam the castle now. He hoped not. The first lords of Winterfell had been men hard as the land they ruled. In the centuries before the Dragon Lords came over the sea, they had sworn allegiance to no man, styling themselves as kings in the north.
So you can take your pick as to who the Minotaur is. Is it the vengeful spirits of the dead kings of winter? Or the crippled little boy who just so happens to be the most powerful green seer in God knows how long? That question aside, you can see that Winterfell is definitely implied as a prison, just like the Wolf's Den. Ultimately, both fortresses represent the hunk of dark fire moon rock imprisoned in the ice moon, and so are imprisoned themselves. The Wolf's Den is surrounded by the newer city of White Harbor, and Winterfell is surrounded by miles and miles of frequently frozen north. So that's the locked part of the dragon locked in ice, the prison symbolism. How about the dragon symbolism? Well, so glad you asked, my friend, so glad you asked. It begins with thinking about the overall temperature of the Starks, symbolically. Are they ice people or fire people? This question is addressed directly in Catelyn's first chapter of A Game of Thrones, when she and Ned discuss the hot springs, one of the very best bits of Winterfell symbolism.
Of all the rooms in Winterfell's great keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest. She seldom had to light a fire. The castle had been built over natural hot springs, and the scalding water rushed through the walls and chambers like blood through a man's body, driving the chill from the stone halls, filling the glass gardens with moist warmth, and keeping the earth from freezing. Open pools smoked day and night in a dozen small courtyards. That was a little thing in summer. In winter, it was the difference between life and death. Catelyn's bath was always hot and steaming, and her walls warm to the touch. The warmth reminded her of Riverrun, but of days in the sun with Lysa and Edmure. But Ned could never abide the heat. Starks were made for the cold, he would tell her, and she would laugh and tell him, in that case, they had certainly built their castle in the wrong place.
Suddenly, the familiar hot springs have a whole new layer of meaning to them, huh? Winterfell is not just a hunk of dark stone surrounded by miles and miles of snow, it's a heated hunk of dark stone surrounded by miles and miles of snow, which is starting to sound pretty dragon-locked and nice to me. Winterfell is presented to us as having a circulatory system, and we can't fail to notice that it's driving the chill from the stone halls, like Davos and Devon's Shadow Chaser, driving or chasing the shadows and the chill from their respective stone halls. Now, according to the Blood of the Other theory, the Starks of Winterfell descend from this Eldrick Shadow Chaser figure who represents the stolen other baby turned Stark. So this bit about the bloodstream of Winterfell driving the chill away reads a lot like a metaphor for the blood of Winterfell being that of Eldrick Shadow Chaser, which it is. Now, whether that's an intentional metaphor or not, it's really the theme and the function that's important. For thousands of years, Winterfell has acted as a bulwark against the winter precisely because it has a source of heat. The Starks might be made for the cold, as Ned says, but their real significance is that they occupy a castle that will stay warm and habitable even in the coldest of winters. That's what's so funny about Catelyn joking the Starks built their castle in the wrong place. It's just the opposite. I don't think that most people actually really appreciate the fact that during a Westerosi winter, Winterfell is basically Siberia. It's close to the equivalent of the Arctic Circle, much farther north than any part of Essos. And I'm sure that most of you have probably never seen 40-foot snowdrifts or even 10-foot snowdrifts, although I do have a couple of patrons from Finland and Canada, so shout out you guys, and leave me a good 40 if you have one. Point being, those hot springs are the obvious reason why you'd want to build a castle there, and certainly they are the main factor in the endurance of Winterfell and House Stark over the millennia. They're made for the cold, and that they were smart enough to build their castle over a network of hot springs. That's really the deal. In fact, it's not just the hot springs. We know that the Starks are actually made to resist the cold on a deeper, more symbolic and magical level. The crown of the King of Winter speaks of the Stark mission, as you recall from many past episodes. We see this crown on Robb's head in A Clash of Kings, and it's specifically said to be made from bronze and iron because those metals are dark and strong to fight the cold. And shout out to Tony Teflon, who made me aware that copper and bronze actually do get stronger the colder that they get. So this business about bronze being a metal that is strong to fight the cold is actually not just poetry. Now, Robb's the King of Winter crown is surmounted by 9 miniature black iron swords, which remind us of all the other black swords in the story. Valyrian steel swords, such as Ned wields, and the dragonglass knives, such as the Night's Watch, are supposed to wield. Thus, we can see that the Starks are meant to fight the cold, just like the Night's Watch, and they're apparently supposed to do it with black swords and knives, just like the Night's Watch, whose ideal weapons are dragonglass and Valyrian steel, or dragon steel, if you can get it. Think of Ned with black ice, Jon with long claw, our buddy Barth Blacksword, who also wielded black ice, the black iron swords in the laps of the Stone Kings of Winter, Ned's 6 gray wraiths with shadow swords at the Tower of Joy, facing off against the Snow White Kingsguard Knights. So here is the icy House Stark, living on a geothermal hotspot, an oasis of warmth amidst the cold, and they're carrying on a tradition of black swords and fighting the cold, and maintaining a millennia-old alliance with the Night's Watch, who also fights the cold with dragonglass or dragonsteel. Winterfell itself is a hunk of dark stone surrounded by snow, and it's warm to the touch. It has hot water like blood, which actually makes it kind of a bloodstone in the symbolic sense. I mean, that's what it symbolizes anyway, a piece of ex-fire moon turned moon meteor and crash landed in the snow. Imagine Winterfell as a meteor that got locked in the ice, but which retains a heart of fire, like a sleeping dragon, or like my boy Jon Snow. Now, there's a great quote from the World of Ice and Fire about the hot springs, which actually brings up the topic of dragons. And Quinn, after you read this quote, why don't you bounce out and jump back in, because you were choking out a little bit on the last quote reading, but see how this one goes.
Okay. Hot springs such as the one beneath Winterfell have been shown to be heated by the furnaces of the world, the same fires that made the 14 flames or the smoking mountain of Dragonstone. Yet the small folk of Winterfell and the Winter Town have been known to claim that the springs are heated by the breath of a dragon that sleeps beneath the castle. This is even more foolish than Mushroom's claims and need not be given any consideration.
No consideration at all. Yeah, so Quinn, go ahead and bounce out and back in and see if that fixes it. You've got a minute before the next quote comes up. So, here we are. There's a dragon sleeping under the castle. I mean, it's almost like I saw that coming, right? Winterfell is compared to Valyria as a place with access to the furnaces of the world, and indeed, that's quite true. Score one for Maesterly science. They figured out that hot springs and volcanoes are like geothermal cousins. Good job, Maesters. There's almost certainly not an actual sleeping dragon beneath Winterfell, but it is true that if some ancient dragon lord had to pick a place to serve as an outpost or even a home in the north, they would pick Winterfell, absolutely. And maybe that's what happened. Winterfell is a geothermal hotspot, and it even has caverns. This is what lends a scrap of credibility to the rumors of Vermax laying eggs at Winterfell, while Prince Jacaerys Targaryen parlayed with Cregan Stark during the Dance of the Dragons. It's just the kind of place a pregnant dragon would find cozy if it could find a way down there. The oldest part of Winterfell, the first keep, even has gargoyles like Dragonstone. I mean, it's a total giveaway as a Dragon Lord type of place. Seriously, though, I do wonder about the gargoyles. I mean, they're extremely rare in Westeros. They're found here on the First Keep, on Dragonstone, and Coldmoat in Duncan Egg, weirdly, has gargoyles, and that's it. In any case, the small folk has certainly served us up quite the dragon locked in ice metaphor in the form of the rumors about a sleeping dragon warming the castle. That funny little folktale is really terrific as a metaphor. The dragon is sleeping and radiating warmth amidst the frozen north. Winterfell has a circulatory system, and its blood is warmed by a dragon. It practically screams, "Blood of the dragon lives here." More specifically, it's said to be a sleeping dragon beneath Winterfell, and if he should ever wake.
He padded over the dry needles and brown leaves to the edge of the wood, where the pines grew thin. Beyond the open fields, he could see the great piles of man rock stark against the swirling flames. The wind blew hot and rich with the smell of blood and burnt meat, so strong he began to slaver. Yet, as one smell drew them onward, others warned them back. He sniffed at the drifting smoke. Men, many horses, and fire, fire, fire. No smell was more dangerous, not even the hard, cold smell of iron, the stuff of man claws and hard skin. The smoke and ash clouded his eyes, and in the sky he saw a great winged snake, whose roar was a river of flame. He bared his teeth, but then the snake was gone. Behind the cliffs, tall fires were eating up the stars. All through the night, fires crackled, and once there was a great roar and a crash that made the earth jump under his feet.
Excellent, excellent. Quinn, so your reading is great. However, there's a slight static crackle, which in my experience is usually fixed by unplugging the microphone and plugging it back in.
Okay.
So give that a shot and see if that fixes it. It's not very noticeable, so it's not a horrible disaster, but it's kind of faint. All right, so hopefully you guys saw that quote coming. And hopefully you also remember Osha saying, "We made enough noise to wake a dragon" when they emerged from the crypts. In the lead up to that quote, Winterfell is described as a shell. And quite frankly, it really does sound like a dragon hatched from inside the First Keep, the one with the gargoyles.
The sky was a pale gray, and smoke eddied all around them. They stood in the shadow of the First Keep, or what remained of it. One whole side of the building had torn loose and fallen away. Stone and shattered gargoyles lay strewn across the yard. They fell just where I did, Bran thought, when he saw them. Some of the gargoyles had broken into so many pieces, it made him wonder how he was alive at all. Nearby, some crows were pecking at a body crushed beneath the tumbled stone. But he lay face down, and Bran could not say who he was. The First Keep had not been used for many hundreds of years, but now it was more of a shell than ever. The floors had burned inside it, and all the beams.
So it's a burned out shell, and this is complemented by Jon calling in A Dance with Dragons, who says the castle is a shell. So Theon calls the castle a shell too, and he does it while standing in the very spot that Bran did in the last quote. Like Bran, Theon also remarks that this is where Bran fell, and notices the shattered gargoyles, who are by then locked in ice and snow. Point being, calling Winterfell a shell over and over again sure seems to enhance all the talk about dragons and dragon eggs beneath Winterfell, and the fiery winged serpent appearing to fly overhead when Winterfell is burned. Now, Summer and Bran probably didn't see a real dragon hatching from the First Keep, even though the line about making enough noise to wake a dragon sure is tantalizing. Nevertheless, I'm sure you can see what I'm driving at here in terms of symbolism. The dragon locked in ice must eventually break free, just as Jon must eventually be resurrected, and I think that is one of the things being depicted by all this Winterfell dragon and shell symbolism. There's also a clue about the Winterfell dragon becoming locked in ice in the first place in the quotes that we just referred to. Now, as we've said in previous episodes, like Tyrion Targaryen and a burning Brandon, both fallen Bran and the fallen gargoyles, which have red fiery eyes in Bran's nightmare, represent fallen fire moon meteors. Both are depicted as landing in the ice. Theon sees the gargoyles covered in snow in the quote we just mentioned. While Bran is in his coma nightmare, he's falling towards icy spires, which have other impaled dreamers on them. As I've said a few times now, I think that being inside the Weirwood net or inside the dream realm is often made synonymous with being locked in ice. Think of Jon's spirit wandering the Bardo while his cold body is temporarily dead, for example. So in that sense, Bran was also locked in the ice after he fell when he was in his coma. In other words, both broken Bran and the broken gargoyles, lying in the same place at the foot of the first keep, represent fire moon meteors locked in the ice, and are in effect synonymous with the castle of Winterfell itself, a heated hunk of dark gray stone surrounded by frozen north. That is one layer of meaning, or of the meaning of the famous last line of A Clash of Kings, which compares Bran to broken Winterfell.
It was not dead, just broken, like me, he thought. I'm not dead either.
Sweet, the static is gone. Yay! All right.
Yay.
Nice. So Bran's fall shows us symbolically the Winterfell dragon becoming locked in ice, and the awakening of this dragon from the ice is symbolized by Bran awakening from his coma with his forehead burning from where the three-eyed crow had pecked it. In order to escape the coma, Bran even has to do a little bit of dream flying, just like a dragon breaking out of the ice. Now, that was the beginning of the opening of Bran's third eye, and I say that it symbolically corresponds to the awakening of the Winterfell dragon. And guess what? In Bran's third eye opening is the scene where Bran's skin changes summer and sees the great winged snake whose roar was a river of flame flying over Winterfell. And then right after seeing it, he comes back to his broken Bran body in the crypts and says, here in the chill, damp darkness of the tomb, his third eye had finally opened. In other words, we're being shown that Bran's third eye opening directly corresponds with the symbolic idea of the Winterfell dragon awakening in fire. And I think this is because the Winterfell dragon represents both Jon and Bran. Jon in a more literal sense, since he's actually part Targaryen and needs actual resurrection, and Bran in a more symbolic sense as the bearer of the fire of the gods who is opening his third eye. Now, in terms of R plus L equals J, most people would agree that every clue about dragons sleeping beneath Winterfell or dragon eggs beneath Winterfell ultimately symbolizes Jon's hidden dragon heritage, a secret whose reveal will surely involve some sort of freaky scene with Jon's spirit finally completing his recurring crypt stream and reaching the lower levels of the crypts, where he will see the ghost of Edric Snowbeard riding a dream dragon and playing Rhaegar's harp while drinking spirit mead from an 8-foot horn graven with runes, or something equally stupendous. Now, I know we're all looking forward to that payoff, aren't you, Quinn?
Yeah, indeed.
Anyways, speaking of Jon's resurrection and rebirth from the Winterfell crypts, take note of the Starks being born symbolism in the following quote as Bran and Rickon emerge from the crypts with Hodor and Osha and Meera and Jojen after the burning of Winterfell. After Hodor opens the door, it says,
Osha poked her spear through and slid out after it, and Rickon squirmed through Meera's legs to follow. Hodor shoved the door open all the way and stepped to the surface. The reeds had to carry Bran up the last few steps.
So Rickon squirms through Meera's legs as though she has just given birth to him, and Bran has to be carried like a baby as they emerge from the crypts and back into the land of the living. Now, who wants to bet against Jon's spirit making a visit to the crypts before he's reborn into the land of the living? Not me. The opening of this door to the crypts is what Osha refers to as having made enough noise to wake a dragon, and it happens while the birth of Starks is being depicted. So, this is a terrific way to foreshadow a dragon Stark being born from the crypts, which can only refer to Jon's resurrection. I mean, yikes. The opening of the door to the Stark crypts makes a noise to wake a dragon, and that kind of speaks for itself, in my opinion. Except for that it doesn't speak for itself. It needs a 2-hour essay framing it, but whatever. In terms of the blood of the other theory, that Night's King, in terms of the blood of the other theory that Night's King was a dragon-blooded person and that the Starks descend from one of his sons who wasn't turned into a full other, I'm sure you can see what's happening here. All of these clues that imply a dragon under Winterfell, which work as evidence for Jon's Dragonlord heritage, can also be seen to be working to tell the hypothetical truth about the Starks being frozen Dragonlords by virtue of their descent from Night's King and Queen. Perhaps that's why Jon's dragon blood secret is hidden in the crypts, because it doesn't just apply to Jon, but actually all of House Stark. Winterfell and House Stark represent the dragon locked in ice, the fire inside the heart of the Ice Moon, just as they are an oasis of heat in the icy north. This truth is part of their fundamental nature, and it's built into their castle and their symbolism from the very first time we saw Ned cleaning a Valyrian steel sword amidst the hot pools of the Godswood. Not very icy. In terms of astronomy symbolism, the message of Winterfell dragon symbolism is clear. If Winterfell represents the Ice Moon, or more specifically the hunk of fiery stone trapped inside the Ice Moon, it's very like a sleeping dragon waiting to explode in fire. Its dark stone is like a shell containing a sleeping dragon, until it doesn't. Now, Ramsay Bolton is the one who set Winterfell on fire and woke the sleeping dragon, and of course Ramsay's primary symbolism is that of a Night's King and a Bloodstone Emperor figure, just the sort of guy to provoke a moon disaster. All right, time for the next section. The Direwolves of Winterfell. This section is dedicated to some of our Guardians of the Galaxy patrons. Sir Imriel Jordain of the Tor, Spinner of the Great Wheel and Guardian of the Sword of the Morning. Sir Harrison of House Casterly, the Noontide Sun, whose words are deeper than ever did plummet's sound, a Guardian of the Shadowcat. Lady Diana, the Ghost Huntress, Pursuer of Truth and Guardian of the King's Crown and the Cradle. And Memosime, the Poem on 2 Feet, Mother of Muses, Rider of the Dragon Saga, and Guardian of the Swan. Boom. There we go. Thank you, patrons. And thank you, everyone in the chat. Yes, insert flamenco. So another way that the fiery dragon heritage of House Stark is depicted as something that belongs to all of House Stark and not just Jon is the Direwolves, the sigil of their house. Why do I say that? Well, basically, everything about the Direwolves implies them as fiery hellhounds. My favorite example of this is the scene where Shaggy and Rickon hide in the crypts after Luwin's death, only to have Shaggy jump out, fight Maester Luwin, and then fight with Summer. The line there was, Bran saw eyes like green fire, a flash of teeth, fur as black as the pit around them. Now, Cerberus, the original hellhound of Greek mythology, acts as a guardian of the underworld, as do all of the stone direwolves that sit beside the stone kings of winter. And Shaggy Dog is basically bringing that symbolism to life in this scene. In other words, I'm calling the direwolves hellhounds, not only because they tend to have eyes of fire, as we're about to see, but because of the Cerberus role that they play guarding the underworld alongside the Hades-like kings of winter in the crypts. The fact that George seems to have borrowed the three-headed aspect of Cerberus for the Targaryen three-headed dragon makes this connection even more intriguing. Said another way, both the direwolf of Stark and the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen are symbolic offspring of Cerberus. There are actually many comparisons to be made between the crypts of Winterfell with their stone kings and the hidden chambers beneath the Red Keep with those dragon skulls. And Arya actually makes the comparison explicit when she's lost beneath the Red Keep in the Dragon Skull room, as a matter of fact. That's a bit of a detour. Or it can be fun homework. Read a couple of the scenes down in the Winterfell crypts, and then read Arya's 2 chapters beneath the Red Keep in A Game of Thrones. You'll find spiral staircases leading down, dead things with eyes that follow you, and a lot of the same imagery and symbolism. Bottom line, they are both Hades-style underworld settings, once more highlighting the fact that the three-headed dragon of Targaryen and the direwolf of Stark are both symbolic children of Cerberus, the hellhound. As for that fiery wolf symbolism, well, let's take a look into the eyes of the direwolves, which are consistently described in fiery language. Ghost has eyes, which are described variously as hot red eyes, 2 great red suns, and eyes that glowed red and baleful. Lady has bright golden eyes. Shaggy has eyes burning like green fire and eyes that were green fire. Summer has eyes smoldering like liquid gold, and after making a kill, it says his muzzle was wet and red, but his eyes burned. Gray Wind has eyes like molten gold, and Theon's nightmare of dead Rob and Gray Wind says Gray Wind stalked beside eyes burning, and man and wolf alike bled from 100 savage wounds. Arya's wolf Nymeria had yellow eyes. When they caught the sunlight, they gleamed like 2 golden coins. And golden coins are dragons in Westeros, so there's a subtle suggestion of dragon eyes here. So the direwolves have eyes of fire, that's well established. What goes well with fire? Smoke, of course. And in the case of the Long Night, darkness caused by smoke. And that's what we see in the fur of the direwolves. Jon says in A Game of Thrones that excepting Ghost, all the other wolves are all dark, gray or black in terms of fur. So we can see them all as being dark. Summer has fur like silver smoke, while Gray Wind is described as smoke dark, the same phrase used to describe Valyrian steel and Ned's ice. A gray wind is a smoky wind anyway, so both Valyrian steel and dark smoke is implied here in Gray Wind's name. Getting darker still, we saw that Shaggy's fur was as black as the pit when down in the crypts, which reminds us of Drogon being as black as night, and of the underworld realm in general, which is where you'd expect to find the pit. Another similarity to Drogon is found when Arya skin changes Nymeria and leads the Great Wolf Pack and calls herself the Night Wolf. Nymeria herself is described by a commoner in the Riverlands as a she-wolf, a bitch from the 7th hell. So, eyes like fire, fur like smoke and darkness in the pit, guardians of hell symbolism. These aren't dire wolves, they're fire wolves. There's nothing remotely icy or cold about them or their symbolism, not even once. The cherry on top is Theon's nightmare vision of Rickon and Bran merged with their direwolves, like the wolfish versions of Valyrian sphinxes.
"Mercy," he sobbed. From behind came a shuddering howl that curdled his blood. "Mercy, mercy!" When he glanced back over his shoulder, he saw them coming. Great wolves the size of horses, with the heads of small children. "Oh, mercy, mercy!" Blood dripped from their mouths, black as pitch, burning holes in the snow where they fell. Every stride brought them closer. Theon tried to run faster, but his legs would not obey. The trees all had faces, and they were laughing at him, laughing. And the howls came again. He could smell the hot breath of the beast behind him, a stink of brimstone and corruption.
Burning black blood is something that we see with Drogon and Melisandre and Beric, all creatures who are fire-made flesh in a very real sense. The dream firewolves with the heads of children also stink of brimstone, which is signature dragon language that compares very well to scenes with the dragons underneath the Great Pyramid of Meereen. I compared them to Valyrian sphinxes because Valyrian sphinxes have the bodies of dragons and the heads of people, in case you're wondering. So there you have it. It's not just a matter of dragon symbolism hidden at Winterfell. We've got a whole pack of fiery hellhounds lurking about. They may be surrounded by snow and ice, but they are guarding the entrance to the hell that is Winterfell. There's a great line in A Game of Thrones which kind of sums this up.
Eddard Stark dreamed of a frozen hell reserved for the Starks of Winterfell.
The North is a frozen hell. Cersei famously tells Ned she'll allow him to live out your days in the gray waste you call home, if he will bend the knee to Joffrey, for example. But the wolves sent there are fiery ones. Fiery wolves in the frozen hell. This is just another version of dragon locked in ice symbolism. Therefore, I would say that the fire wolf motif simply augments the Starks as frozen dragon lords idea and shows that it's not just Jon bringing the brimstone stink to Winterfell, but all of House Stark. Stinks. Brimstone really does stink. Sulfur's nasty. George would seem to be referencing Dante's Inferno with this line also. And again, when he has Barristan say that half the hells are made of flame in A Dance with Dragons, which implies that the other half of the hells are made of ice. An icy hell is exactly what Dante finds at the center of the ninth circle of hell, Cocytus, or do you know how to say that one, Quinn? Cocytus?
I'm not sure.
It's probably not Cocytus. That'd be too funny. Let's go with Cocytus. wait for the chat to correct me. In any case, it's a big frozen lake at the center of the ninth circle of hell. And you are not going to believe who we find trapped in the ice, literally locked in the ice, at the center of this frozen lake in hell. That's right. It's none other than our buddy Lucifer, whom Dante has conflated with the devil. He's depicted as a giant winged beast, and he's literally trapped waist deep in the frozen lake. So perhaps we should say a frozen hell reserved for Starks and Lucifer. What does this say about the Starks, I wonder? Well, probably that they are descended from Azor Ahai and the Night's King, the Lucifer figures of A Song of Ice and Fire. This observation was made by our good friend and frequent contributor, drink, Ravenous Reader. And this is almost certainly the place where George first got the seeds for the concept of the dragon locked in ice. Or at least we can say that this detail from Dante's Inferno was surely playing in George's mind when he conceived the idea. Lucifer must, of course, be freed from the frozen lake in time for Armageddon, and similarly, Jon will be breaking out of the ice in time for the new long night. And the breaking out of the ice in the sky of the ice moon will trigger Armageddon. So it's all very copacetic. So from sleeping dragons to dragon eggs, to hot springs like blood, to fiery hellhound wolves, and right down to the concept of a frozen hell to trap Lucifer, Winterfell is basically constructed as a demonstration of all the dragon locked in ice symbolism, as I told you about 30 minutes ago. And it's not just dragon locked in ice and firewolf locked in ice symbolism being depicted, but the reawakening of that sleeping monster, the Minotaur, who's implied as being inside Winterfell's labyrinthine walls. That story is told by Winterfell's burning, when winged snakes and burning brandons emerge from the shell of Winterfell. And it will be told again when Jon's resurrection path loops through the Winterfell crypts, as it surely must. As I mentioned at the top, it's the same story told by Jon's dream of a moon-faced, ice-whited Ned Stark, exploding in a nimbus of flame like a burning wicker man. And do you know what other story all of this symbolism tells? Why? That would be the impending moon disaster involving the ice moon, of course. The moon was an egg, Khaleesi, but Winterfell is a broken shell from which dragons hatch. And oh gosh, that matches the moon myth pretty well. How's the rest of that one go? One day the other moon will kiss the sun too, and the dragons will return, I believe it is. As it happens, Winterfell is not the only ice moon place that seems destined to have some kind of dragon awakening event. All right, that is the end of this section. Just gonna take 30 seconds here. How am I doing, Quinn?
Excellent. I love the whole part about the direwolves being hellhounds.
That's pretty fun, huh?
Really cool.
Yeah, it's sitting right under your nose. Once you start looking at it, you're like, wait a minute, there's not any damn ice symbolism anywhere.
No. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then the bit about the three-headed dragon and the Targaryen three-headed dragon and the direwolf of Stark both being tied to Cerberus, really made it clear for me too. Mm-hmm. And I will stop and thank you guys throwing in some super chats, Steph is, Disputed Lands, a couple other folks. Thank you very, very much. I really, really appreciate it. I feel encouraged. I'm already forgotten about all the ants I had to kill this morning. All right, let's cue up the flamenco guitar once more. The end of the world, and we know it. This section goes out to more of our Guardians of the Galaxy patrons. Nienna the Wise, the Persephoenix, guardian of the Ice Dragon, whose words are from sorrow, wisdom. Daphne Eversweet, Queen Bee of the Red Poppy Fields, guardian of the Crone's Lantern, and keeper of the Black Rabbit with big, pointy, nasty teeth who can leap about. And Manemy of the Jade Sea, the Merry Deviant, keeper of Winter Roses, and guardian of the Celestial Ghost. And in case you're wondering, Monty Python references in the no guitar? No guitar again? No, it should be working. Oh, well, that's sad. You guys didn't hear the guitar? Oh well. Well, you heard the patron names. That's what's important. Quinn, you didn't hear the guitar either, huh?
No, I did not.
Okay. You're not hearing it now?
No.
Huh. Okay. Oh, well. Well, the important thing is that we thank the patrons. And by the way, if you want more flamenco guitar, John Walsh Guitar is the name of his YouTube channel. And he's got a whole bunch of really cool stuff. He performs live a lot of times with classic Spanish percussion at very high profile flamenco events. John Walsh is top notch. So John Walsh Guitar on YouTube. There we go. All right. So the end of the world and we know it. Now, I've said many times that all Ice Moon symbols, be they persons, places, or things, contain dragon locked in ice symbolism. And at the end of the Ned episode, I mentioned that most Ice Moon people and places have symbolic hints about the impending Ice Moon disaster. This is because the impending Ice Moon disaster is akin to the dragon locked in ice awakening. And every place that shows the dragon locked in ice hints at an awakening, usually a violent or dramatic one. We just saw it at Winterfell. George literally blew up the first keep, had Bran see a fiery winged snake, and then dropped in a line about making enough noise to wake a dragon when the Starks reemerge from the crypts. Who knows what else will happen at Winterfell before the story is complete? Stannis was going there with his Lightbringer last time I checked. Is he still stuck out there in the snow, by the way? I'll have to ask Beefish. Must be getting cold out there. Beyond the walls of Winterfell, one of the best and most direct symbols of the Ice Moon is the Heart of Winter. It's the place that represents the promise of a new long night in Bran's coma dream as he looks past the curtain of light and into the heart of winter, terrified, while Bloodraven whispers, "Now you know why you must live," in his ear. Symbolically, excuse me. Symbolically, if not literally, this is where the others come from. And we all know that A, we haven't seen anything close to a full-on invasion of the others yet, and that B, we can surely look forward to seeing it soon. An invasion of blue star-eyed others is akin to an invasion of cold stars, which is basically what I'm predicting will happen in the sky to kick off the new long night. So we'll have actual cold falling stars that lead to an invasion of symbolic cold stars. Therefore, we can say that the Heart of Winter, as a proper Ice Moon symbol, is clearly promising a symbolic meteor shower that will come with a long winter. Then we have the Eyrie, a prominent Ice Moon symbol. The Eyrie is an impregnable castle of white marble high up on a snow-covered mountain, holding a ton of frozen ice and snow. But there is some foreshadowing regarding that mountain called the Giant's Lance, which suggests an avalanche may be in the cards. Now, we are going to do an entire episode dedicated to the Eyrie, I promise, and it's coming soon in the Moons of Ice and Fire series. But here is a sneak preview from a Catelyn chapter of A Game of Thrones.
The eastern sky was rose and gold. As the sun broke over the Vale of Arryn, Catelyn Stark watched the light spread, her hands resting on the delicate carved stone of the balustrade outside her window. Below her, the world turned from black to indigo to green as dawn crept across fields and forest. Pale white mist rose off Alyssa's tears, where the ghost waters plunged over the shoulder of the mountain to begin their long tumble down the face of the Giant's Lance. Catelyn could feel the faint touch of spray on her face. Alyssa Arryn had seen her husband, her brothers, and all her children slain, yet in life she had never shed a tear. So in death, the gods had decreed that she would know no rest until her weeping watered the black earth of the Vale, where the men she had loved were buried. Alyssa had been dead 6,000 years now, and still no drop of the torrent had ever reached the valley floor far below.
We've seen tears of blood represent the fire moon meteors, so it should not surprise you to hear me say that icy tears can symbolize ice moon meteors. Think of the wall being said to weep when it melts on a sunny day. And the waterfall known as Alyssa's Tears actually does freeze in winter, as a matter of fact. On a basic level, if the moon can be seen as a face, then it makes sense to see things falling from the moon as tears. Accordingly, the cold tears that tumble down the face of the Giant's Lance remind us of Ice Moon meteor symbols in this paragraph. Namely, they remind us of the symbolic language used for the others and the sword dawn. First of all, there are ghostly Ice Moon meteor symbols, which makes us think of the others. And when it says pale white mist rose from the ghost waters of the Alyssa's Tears waterfall, we really are thinking then about the others, especially Tormund Giantsbane's line to Jon in A Dance with Dragons.
A man can fight the dead, but when their masters come, when the white mist rise up, how do you fight mist, Crow?
The others are rising white mists and ghosts. We got that. In fact, behold this awesome clue about the others that I found in A Game of Thrones just like 2 days ago that uses this same language.
The rising sun sent fingers of light through the pale white mist of dawn. A wide plain spread across beneath them, bare and brown, its flatness here and there relieved by long, low hummocks. Ned pointed them out to his king. The barrows of the first men. Robert frowned. Have we ridden onto a graveyard?
Don't you mean, have we ridden onto a graveyard? No, you're allowed to do actual good narrations. The rest of us who don't have such a good reading voice will do the cheesy Robert voice. But it is really a funny passage because this passage seems to imply a connection between the others and the most ancient first men, the Barrow King in particular, who is like a deathly form of Garth the Green, whom Robert embodies. So it's kind of like Robert walking onto his own grave in terms of archetypes, which Martin is obviously playing with here with Robert's clueless, have we ridden onto a graveyard? The other notable thing is of course, the pale white mists of dawn language, which is yet another example of other symbolism appearing alongside that of dawn. Of course, this whole scene with Cat observing the chilly ghost torrent of Alyssa's tears occurs at dawn too. And of course, I believe the explanation is that dawn is the original ice of House Stark drink, and was at some point the dawn of the others, meaning that it was possessed by Night's King. If Night's King ruled during the long night, as I suggest, then he would have stolen dawn in the figurative sense of preventing the sun to rise. So it follows that he might have stolen dawn the sword as well. At least that's the short version of the theory. Now, the best clue about dawn in the scene with Cat observing the tears comes from Alyssa's tears being referred to as a torrent and then ghost waters. And another time in the same book, they're called a ghost torrent, because the Torrentine River is the one that flows out to sea at Starfall, where dawn resides. And since these icy tears of Alyssa's are ice, moon, meteor symbols, as dawn is, I tend to think that the torrent language is no coincidence. And of course, you recall the scene where Dany dreams of refighting the Battle of the Trident on Dragonback, using dragonfire to melt ice-armored enemies who turned the Trident into a torrent. So these ice-armored enemies melted by Dany's dragonfire have always been taken to represent others, of course. So once again, we have the association between torrential waters and ice moon symbols, just as we do with Alyssa's tears. And remember, he uses the torrent word twice to describe the tears. So again, I think it's intentional. Why? Because dawn is the original ice, and because dawn, the others and rivers that flow from melting ice are all ice moon meteor symbols. Now, the thing that takes all these ice moon meteor symbols and makes them foreboding is the prophecy aspect of the Alyssa legend. Alyssa's ghost will know no rest until her waterfall hits the ground. What's implied here is that one day that might happen, that her tears might actually reach the ground, meaning one day ice moon meteors will reach the ground too. And then perhaps Night's Queen can be content. I don't know. Maybe all the ice moon wants is to get that damn black meteor out of it, right? Symbolism aside, the way in which Alyssa's tears might actually reach the ground is if there is some kind of large avalanche, or if a streaking fireball melts all the snow off the mountain. Just saying. So the Giant's Lance might shed its snow, and Alyssa's ghost torrent may one day reach the ground. Winterfell is a shell for waking dragons, waking Jon Snows, and waking burning Brandons. And the heart of winter is slowly, ever so slowly, preparing to unleash the others on Westeros. And hey, nice Sept of Baelor you got there, all shining white marble and all. Be a real shame if something happened to it. Are you sure they removed all the old jars of wildfire from King Aerys' day? I kid, but even if someone doesn't blow up the Sept of Baelor, as happens in the TV show, mild spoilers, the idea of warriors' sons pouring out of Baelor's Sept also works well to symbolize an invasion of the others. As we discussed in Moons of Ice and Fire 3, Visenya Draconis, the warrior sons, like the Kingsguard, serve as symbolic stand-ins for the others, with their mirror-like armor, their crystal sword in the darkness sigil that replicates the look of an other's crystal sword in the darkness, and the crystal stars in the pommels of their actual swords, which give them star sword meteor symbolism to match the star eyes of the others. So here's yet another ice moon place, the Sept of Baelor, promising a disastrous outpouring of crystalline star swords, and maybe even an actual big explosion. With all that said, what do you think we'll find at the wall? Dragon-locked in ice symbolism, perhaps, and maybe some hints about the moon blowing up? Well, let's go on and have a look, shall we? The wall is basically our master template for the ice moon, for obvious reasons. It's huge. It's made of ice. It just loves to glitter in the moonlight, and it has a knack for imprisoning dragons. The descriptions of it lay out the complete package of icy symbolism, and there are 3 symbols in particular that we'll focus on: ice dragons, ice swords, and icy or frozen rivers. All 3 of these symbols work to imply the ice moon as something that gives off icy moon meteors, and each adds more specific associations as well. The ice dragon symbol evokes Jon and the dragon locked in ice. The white sword ice sword symbol evokes both dawn and the swords of the others. And the frozen river symbol kind of suggests a possibility for flooding, in addition to referring back to the white knife ice sword symbolism of the frozen White Knife River at White Harbor. When applied to the wall, all 3 of these symbols are quite ominous, as you would expect. But we'll get to all that gloom and doom in due time. Let's set that aside for a second. Let's just enjoy the wall while it still stands, you know? Live in the moment. We'll start with the basic descriptions of the wall, just as they come to us in the books. Jon Snow's first chapter, At the Wall in A Game of Thrones, gives us several fantastic descriptions of the wall, such as this one.
As he stood outside the armory looking up, Jon felt almost as overwhelmed as he had that day on the King's Road when he had seen it for the first time. The wall was like that. Sometimes he could almost forget that it was there, the way you forget about the sky or the earth underfoot. But there were other times when it seemed as if there was nothing else in the world. It was older than the 7 kingdoms, and when he stood beneath it and looked, it made Jon dizzy. He could feel the great weight of all that ice pressing down on him, as if it were about to topple, and somehow Jon knew that if it fell, the world would fall with it.
Dun, dun, dun. Like I said, Chekhov's wall has got to fall, and I think the same might go for that ice moon. It may well be the reason that the wall falls, I suspect. And when that icy moon meteor falls through the sky, the world will fall with it, in that it will signal the last battle, if you will, the Ragnarok or Armageddon of A Song of Ice and Fire, the new long night. It won't be the end of the world, but rather the end of a world age, where the world will be remade, as Euron says in the Forsaken chapter. I especially like how the ice disaster symbolism is made personal for Jon, when it says he could feel the great weight of all that ice pressing down on him, as if he'd been buried beneath it. Bingo! Yet more dead Jon in the ice cells foreshadowing, and a great nod to the idea of the wall as being a tomb or a prison for a dragon meteor man like Jon. Now, besides Jon outright speculating about the wall falling, notice that the wall is compared to the sky, and then Jon thinks about the wall falling. I mean, I don't want to sound like Chicken Little or anything, but I am warning of an impending meteor catastrophe, so yeah, guys, the sky is falling. But who knows? Maybe I'm just a doom and gloom type and just too excited about moon meteors, and I'm misinterpreting things. Here's another passage from that same Jon chapter.
The largest structure ever built by the hands of man, Benjen Stark had told Jon on the King's Road when they had first caught sight of the wall in the distance. And beyond a doubt, the most useless, Tyrion had added with a grin. But even the imp grew silent as they rode closer. You could see it from miles off, a pale blue line across the northern horizon, stretching away to the east and west, vanishing in the far distance, immense and unbroken. This is the end of the world, it seemed to say.
Damn it! The end of the world, it seemed to say. Well, we can't say we weren't warned. This is all in the first book so far. I like how it says immense and unbroken. And then, this is the end of the world, as if to comment on how spectacularly unbroken the wall is before suggesting it as the end of the world. Again, this is the same chapter in which he says that if the wall ever fell, the world would fall with it. So, different chapter now, but still in a Game of Thrones. We have this gem, which comes as Jon pouts about not being chosen, or about rather being chosen for the stewards instead of the rangers.
Outside, Jon looked up at the wall shining in the sun, the melting ice creeping down its side in 100 thin fingers. Jon's rage was such that he would have smashed it all in an instant. The world be damned. Jon, Samwell Tarly said excitedly. Wait, don't you see what they're doing?
Yikes. Easy there, Johnny boy. But I'll ask you the same question that Sam asked Jon. Don't you see what George is doing? I mean, if this is not foreshadowing, then I don't know what foreshadowing looks like. It's noteworthy that it's Jon smashing the wall here. Think of resurrected Jon hatching from the wall, like a frozen dragon breaking out of its moon shell. The world will be damned when the other moon kisses the sun, as the wall is doing here by shining and melting in the sun. But at least we'll have Jon, hopefully with all his rage channeled in the right direction. I also have to give two of my good friends and fellow YouTubers, Azor Hype and Secrets of the Citadel, a quick shout out here, as their exploration of Ragnarok and A Song of Ice and Fire clued me into three things. 1, the wall seems like a very close analog to the Bifrost Bridge. 2, the black-clad Jon Snow with a burning red sword is very similar to the fire giant Suitor, who also wields a burning red sword. And 3, this is the big one, and finally, it is Suitor who breaks the Bifrost Bridge with his flaming sword when Ragnarok falls. Now, I don't think Jon will literally chop down the wall with Longclaw, of course, but I've been saying from the start that his resurrection will be linked to the wall falling, and that this hashtag Ice Moon Apocalypse I am talking about, which seems like Martin's echo. I'm sorry, I botched that sentence. So I don't think Jon will literally chop down the wall with Longclaw, of course, but I have been trying to say from the start of this essay that his resurrection will be linked to the wall falling and this hashtag Ice Moon Apocalypse that I'm talking about, which seems like Martin's echo of Suitor destroying the Bifrost. In this last scene, at least, Jon's ready to smash it. If only he were a huge fire giant, we'd all be in trouble. But let's forget about this whole prophecy of doom thing for just a moment and talk about the wall itself and its descriptive language. 2 quotes ago, the wall is described as a pale blue line across the northern horizon, and this next quote from A Clash of Kings gives us a healthy dose of wall symbols.
Sam squinted up at the wall. It loomed above them, an icy cliff 700 feet high. Sometimes it seemed to Jon almost a living thing, with moods of its own. The color of the ice was wont to change with every shift of the light. Now it was the deep blue of the frozen rivers, now the dirty white of old snow. And when a cloud passed before the sun, it darkened to the pale gray of pitted stone. The wall stretched east and west as far as the eye could see, so huge that it shrunk the timbered keeps and the stone towers of the castles to insignificance. It was the end of the world.
Yeah, just real quick, I want to comment. I see people in the chat starting to get excited about the wall falling and talking about when it might fall. We'll talk about that more next week on the live stream, but I would think that it's probably going to happen at the end of TWOW, not at the beginning of TWOW. But we can talk about that and let everyone give their opinions and reasons about when it might fall and why at the live stream. Although, Quinn, I will ask you real quick, setting aside the whole moon meteor thing, assuming the wall is going to fall, would you see that as like mid-TWOW, end of TWOW, or early TWOW?
I feel like that could go either way. If I had to put money on it, I would say somewhere around mid-TWOW. Somewhere around like Red Wedding in Storm of Swords.
I was right about to say that, yeah, like 2/3 of the way through, like Red Wedding. Maybe so. Yep. Okay. And yeah, I had my screen blocked, but it's not anymore. So, all right. So, I really was trying to be positive. I was. But here we have the wall. Once again, it was the end of the world. Now, of course, they're talking about it's like the end of the civilized world. But I mean, Martin is really hitting us here a lot with this end of the world stuff. I mean, you have to admit, it does seem like the Wall spends basically all of its time thinking about the end of the world. I mean, it's right there in the text. Don't blame me. I look at scenes like this and I can't help but think that one day will kiss the sun too and crack and the ice dragons will return. What can I say? Even worse, the very next paragraph mentions the red comet. It's almost as if the sub-narrative is saying, look, the Wall is like the end of the world. And oh, by the way, did you notice the enormous comet, the color of blood and fire? I wonder what could help the Wall end the world. I really have no idea at all. Certainly not that red comet in the sky. Anyways, I'm obviously having a lot of fun here with the end of the world stuff, but we do actually need to talk about the Wall itself, which in this scene is described as looking like pale stone, like snow, or like frozen rivers. So going in order, pale gray pitted stone is a very lunar sounding description. And it looks this way, quote, when a cloud passed before the sun, which implies either an eclipse of the sun or perhaps just clouds darkening the sun, such as after the moon meteor impact. As for snow, well, snow is snow. It's kind of the crux of what we're talking about, Jon Snow, and lots of snow falling from the sky day after day for years. Now, describing the Wall as looking like a frozen river is as good as calling it a white knife, especially since we already know the Wall has sword and snake symbolism. We'll see this symbolism again in a minute. Now, the last part of the quote I want to draw your attention to is Jon thinking that the Wall is like a living thing with changing moods. In A Dance with Dragons, Jon reflects back on this idea again, thinking,
the Wall has more moods than Mad King Ares, they'd say, or sometimes the Wall has more moods than a woman.
So the latter comparison names the Wall a moody, icy woman. And that's got our attention, as it certainly makes the Wall more moon-like. I don't know about the moody part. I don't really make a habit of calling women moody myself. Pro tip, not a good idea. But of course, thinking of the Wall as an icy woman simply reminds us of the Night's Queen with her cold, moon-pale flesh. She's the only icy woman that we know of in the entire story. So comparing the Wall to an icy woman has to make us think of Night's Queen, and she just happens to be compared to the moon. The very concept of an ice moon pretty much starts with Night's Queen, so it definitely makes sense to compare the Wall to her. Now, the first comparison, comparing the Wall to Mad King Ares, effectively names the Wall an icy version of a dragon, which means ice dragon. Comparing the Wall to Mad Ares also kind of implies the Wall is an unstable and explosive ice dragon. The Mad King tried to blow up King's Landing after all. And actually, it could be some of Ares's overripe fruits, which doomed the Sept of Baelor, another ice moon location. As you might recall, the Wall has been more directly associated with an ice dragon on several occasions, of course, and it's certainly a major part of the overall Wall symbolism. We've already covered some of this in the Moons of Ice and Fire series, but think about the Wall's ice dragon symbolism in the context of an ice moon disaster potential. The Wall is a big stationary thing, so it's not an obvious comp for an ice dragon, which flies and presumably destroys things on occasion. The idea that the Wall can be like an ice dragon makes a lot more sense, though, when you think of the Wall as being analogous to the ice moon, which is the mother of ice dragon meteors. Indeed, the four quotes which compare the Wall directly to an ice dragon seem to tell the familiar story. It's also an ice dragon in the sense that it eats Jon, as the ice moon eats the black fire moon meteor. All right, time for the next section. I'm going to see if I can get some guitar happening, which I think I can, simply by taking the output and plugging those speakers in. Where are those speakers? This is going to be worth it. You all like John Walsh's flamenco guitar. Beautiful. You're beautiful. Ice dragon food. This section goes out to some of our earthly avatars of the 12 houses of heaven. Direwolves, the Alpha Patron, a descendant of Gilbert of the Vines and Garth the Green, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Aquarius. Lord Leopold the Victorious, the Fire Lion of Lancasterly Rock, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Leo. Werlane Dervish, Woods Witch of the Wolfswood, earthly avatar of Celestial House Scorpio. And Turin the Elf, Tavern Keep of the Winespring Inn, Master of the Abyss, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Cancer. There we go. I know y'all heard that. Woo! Alrighty. So back to our essay. Ice Dragon food. Time for some Ice Dragon food. Yay, everyone's happy about the flamenco. By the way, Quinn, I'm sure you're seeing the abundant praise pouring in the chat for your vocal readings.
Thank you guys a lot. I do try.
Awesome. You were the first person I thought to ask. Let's see here. Okay, so there are a couple of times that Bran and Jon use the prominent blue star in the Ice Dragon constellation to find the way to the wall. But it's really the 4 quotes that make direct comparisons between the wall and the Ice Dragon, which are instructive. So let's have Quinn read those to us. The first comes in a Jon chapter of A Storm of Swords as Jon and a few members of the Watch survey the damage inside the ice tunnel after the Battle of Castle Black.
Jon nodded weakly. The door swung open. Pip led them in, followed by Clytus and the lantern. It was all Jon could do to keep them up with Maester Aemon. The ice pressed close around them, and he could feel the cold seeping into his bones. The weight of the wall above his head. It felt like walking down the gullet of an ice dragon. The tunnel took a twist, then another. Pip unlocked a second iron gate. They walked further, turned again, and saw light ahead, faint and pale through the ice. That's bad, Jon knew at once. That's very bad. Then Pip said, "There's blood on the floor."
Is Axe bad? That's what I thought of. I got that one. So here's Jon's death being clearly foreshadowed as he walks into the wall and into the gullet of an ice dragon. The wall seems to want to eat Jon. Symbolically, we can see this as the ice moon swallowing the black meteor man, Jon, with a huge cold mouth. The line about the cold seeping into his bones seems like an obvious reference to Bran's visions of Jon when he looked north and saw, quote, the wall shining like blue crystal and his bastard brother Jon sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. It also reminds us of Ned in the rain right before his fight with Jaime, where it says that Ned was soaked through to the bone and his soul had grown cold. Then, just to reinforce the death imagery, they see blood on the floor, and Jon has a strong sense of foreboding. Now, around the bend is Mag the Mighty and Donal Noy and a few other Dead Night's Watchmen, which would seem to symbolize the struggle or battle inside the Weirwood net that I've been picking up clues about. And that, by the way, is what the Weirwood Compendium will be building towards once I pick that one up. There's a fight inside the Weirwood net, and I think that's pretty important. So, setting that aside for another day, we can at least observe that Donal Noy is a valiant Night's Watchman who died and whose body is now inside the wall. That's probably the way Jon is headed too, if his body is stored in the ice cells. Donal's name also contains the word dawn, so there is that. Don't forget that there is a Jonal One-Eye Stark, which sort of combines Jon and Donal's name with the one-eye symbolism of Odin and the Stark name. And of course, Jon already has one-eye Odin symbolism because of his the eagle wound. Donal Noy has one arm, which is kind of like his own version of the Odin symbolism, mixed with the symbolism of the moon explosion being like a hand burning or hand chopping, such as Jon's burnt hand or Jaime's chopped hand or Davos's chopped fingers, so on and so forth. Jon also lives in Donal Noy's chambers after becoming Lord Commander, so there's really a lot in common there with Jon and Donal Noy, and all of that makes it easier to see Donal Noy's body here as being another layer of death foreshadowing for Jon. And of course, Azor Ahai was a smith, as Donal Noy was. Now check out the lines that come a couple of paragraphs later, which seem to depict Jon's rebirth from the ice.
He needed the sun then. It was too cold and dark inside the tunnel, and the stench of blood and death was suffocating. Jon gave the lantern back to Clytus, squeezed around the bodies and through the twisted bars, and walked toward the daylight to see what lay beyond the splintered door. The huge carcass of a dead mammoth partially blocked the way. One of the beast's tusks snagged his cloak and tore it as he edged past. 3 more giants lay outside, half buried beneath stone and slush and hardened pitch. He could see where the fire had melted the wall, where the great sheets of ice had come sloughing off in the heat to shatter on the blackened ground. He looked up where they'd come from. When you could stand here, it seems immense, as if it were about to crush you.
About to crush you. Well, that's again, it's more Ice Moon disaster symbolism. Think about Jon emerging from the tunnel here as Jon being reborn from the ice, like the dragon hatching at Winterfell when it was burned. Jon walks out of the tunnel and sees where fire has melted the wall and great sheets of ice have cracked off, almost as if his hatching had done the damage. It's very similar to Bran and company coming out of the crypts and noticing that one side of the first keep had collapsed in the fire. The resurrection language here is exceptional, with Jon squeezing around the bodies and through the twisted bars, which depicts Jon as both escaping the grave and escaping a prison, and escaping the belly of the ice dragon, of course. The splintered wooden door Jon walks through seems evocative of all the weirwood door symbolism, and is probably intended as a complement to the idea of Jon and his archetype being reborn from the weirwood net in some sense. In particular, the splintered wooden door would seem to imply Jon breaking out of the weirwood net, which is what Azor Ahai probably did, or still wants to do if he's stuck in there. Just to make the point clear, all this obvious death and resurrection from the ice symbolism for Jon here comes alongside the language about the ice dragon-like wall seeming as if it were about to crush you. Again, I say that this is a clue that Jon's resurrection will coincide with the impending Ice Moon disaster, one which will probably topple the wall as well. We'll come back to this idea in the final section when we discuss Jon's Snow Moon dream, so remember this last scene, which seems so suggestive of Jon hatching from the wall. In A Dance with Dragons, Jon busts out the ice dragon talk again when he's in that tunnel.
The road beneath the wall was as dark and cold as the belly of an ice dragon, and twisty as a serpent. Dolorous Ed led them through with a torch in hand. Molly had the keys for the 3 gates, where black bars of iron as thick as a man's arm closed off the passage.
So as with the previous ice dragon quote, we once again see the comparison between being inside the wall and being inside an ice dragon. It doesn't get any more dragon locked in ice than this. I mean, we've got dragons and locks and ice and Jon all right here. And if you're playing a drinking game, that last sentence was probably a lot of trouble for you. But of course, I do not encourage the official A Song of Ice and Fire drinking game, which I helped contribute to. So, moon, meteor, moon, meteor, moon, meteor. Kidding aside, you'll also notice that the black iron bars are compared to a man's arm, and they're also locked in the ice, which again implies the idea of people, or at least body parts, locked in the ice. More specifically, black iron arms remind us of the black hands of wights like cold hands, whose hands were black and hard as iron, and as cold as iron too. Shout out to the Sacred Order of the Black Hand, by the way. Finally, the ice tunnel, being as twisty as a serpent, gives me a good excuse to remind you that the underground tunnels beneath Castle Black, which also run under the wall, are called, say it with me, wormways, as if they had been made by fireworms. So I think it's pretty clear that Martin is showing us the idea of dragons and snakes and fireworms under the ice of the wall pretty strongly, just as we saw at Winterfell. In fact, there's even a similar dragon's egg beneath the wall rumor to the one at Winterfell, which comes to us in an idle musing from Sam.
There were dragons here 200 years ago. Sam found himself thinking as he watched the cage making a slow descent. They would just have flown to the top of the wall. Queen Alysanne had visited Castle Black on her dragon, and Jaehaerys, her king, had come after her on his own. Could Silverwing have left an egg behind? Or had Stannis found one egg on Dragonstone? Even if he has an egg, how can he hope to quicken it? Baelor the Blessed had prayed over his egg, and other Targaryens had sought to hatch theirs with sorcery. All they got for it was farce and tragedy.
So there's both the implication of a dragon's egg somewhere here at the Wall and of someone hatching a dragon here at the Wall. Stannis, who's a Dark Azor High figure. Then there's mention of Baelor the Blessed, whom you'll recall has covert Night's King symbolism by way of his Bael-related name, the symbolism of his wives and family, and his habit of locking Ice Moon maidens in towers. Good Queen Alysanne has fantastic Ice Queen symbolism, by the way. Her name comes from the names of other Ice Moon maidens, such as Alyssa of the Vale legend, Lysa Tully, Lyanna Stark, Elaine Stone, Elanis Harlaw, Theon's mother, and probably one or two others that I've forgotten about. Alysanne famously had a hand in closing the Night Fort, and even funded the building of a smaller, more manageable castle called Deep Lake. The castle known as Snowgate was renamed Queensgate in her honor, implying her as a snow queen, I'd say. And according to an SSM, which means So Spake Martin, it is a quote from Martin, SSM, Alysanne's appearance fits the bill, as he said that she has clear blue eyes and high cheekbones, and that in old age her hair turned white as snow. I would guess that's probably something that he wrote for the World of Ice and Fire that will probably end up in Sons of the Dragon, because that's pretty specific. He already knows she has snow white hair and blue eyes. Why would he have those specific details picked out already? Because she's an Ice Queen figure. Her dragon Silverwing makes a pretty good Ice Dragon symbol since she took it to the Wall, and she's silver. And during the Dance of the Dragons, which happened after the death of Alysanne, Silverwing was claimed by Ulf the White, adding to the white dragon, Ice Dragon symbolism of Silverwing, who may have laid an egg at the Wall. You'll probably recall the next Ice Dragon quote, which is from Alice Karstark's wedding, because we quoted it just a few episodes ago. That's the scene at the Wall where Alice was called Winter's Lady and played the role of a Night's Queen figure, with the younger Magnar of Thenn as the Night's King figure, giving his fire to her to be frozen. The relevant Ice Dragon quote was, "The wind was blowing from the east along the Wall, cold as the breath of the Ice Dragon in the tales old Nan used to tell, and it made Melisandre's fire shiver and huddle in its ditch." A Night's Queen wedding represents her taking the seed and soul of Night's King and turning his hot dragon fire cold, which is exactly what's going on in this scene symbolically with the shivering fire. And so it makes perfect sense to see the Wall breathing like an ice dragon here and making the fire cold. It's just like the Wall eating Jon and swallowing him down into its ice dragon gullet a moment ago. All right, so our last Ice Dragon Wall quote shows us more about the dragon reawakening from the ice and about things descending from the Ice Moon.
A sudden gust of wind A sudden gust of wind set Ed's cloak flapping noisily. "Best go down, my lord. This wind's like to push us off the Wall, and I never did learn the knack of flying." They rode the winch lift back to the ground. The wind was gusting, cold as the breath of the Ice Dragon in the tales old Nan told when Jon was a boy. The heavy cage was swaying. From time to time it scraped against the Wall, starting small crystalline showers of ice that sparkled in the sunlight as they fell, like shards of broken glass. Glass, Jon mused, might be of use here. Castle Black needs its own glass gardens, like the ones at Winterfell. We could grow vegetables, even in the deep of winter.
Whew. All right, so after discussing the efficacy of flying down from the moon wall like dragons, excuse me, I mistyped that one, setting myself up for disaster. So after discussing the efficacy of flying down from the moon-like wall like dragons, they instead ride down in the winch cage, which is much more reasonable, blowing about in the cold breath of the Ice Dragon wind, and when it collides with the Wall, it's triggering crystalline showers of ice, which are like shards of broken glass as they drink the light of the sun. Showers of sparkling ice glass being chipped off of an Ice Moon symbol like the Wall, in close proximity to Jon and Ice Dragon talk. Well, You can't expect me not to say ice moon meteor shower, or to not think of dawn, the pale as milk glass sword, which I think was the original ice. A storm of ice swords, as pale as milk glass. Then immediately after, Jon has a dream of spring, if you will, as he imagines building a glass garden's enclosure similar to that of Winterfell, so that they can grow green things in the deep of winter, like a true Jack in the Green, nourishing a bit of green life during the winter to flower again in the spring. I didn't mention the glass gardens when we spoke of Winterfell, but the same Jack in the Green symbolism applies there as well. In the winter, the gardens are an oasis of green amidst the snowy north, a complement to Winterfell's hot springs, which make it an oasis of warmth. I should also mention the real-world King of Winter tradition here. The little wicker man, King of Winter, is supposed to be burned to help usher in the spring, as most of you will recall. And the same may be true of resurrected Jon, who is probably not long for this world. He may not live to see the spring, but he does dream of it and set it in motion, and I think that is his role. Just like Jack in the Green. So there you have it. As we've seen in these 4 quotes, the Wall's ice dragon symbolism serves to equate it both with the idea of an ice moon that contains a dragon and the idea of a meteor dragon coming from the ice moon. The icy sword symbolism that popped up a couple of times reinforces the suggestion of icy meteor dragons, and anything about icy swords or dragons coming from the moon ultimately implies some kind of hashtag ice moon apocalypse. In fact, our next batch of quotes about the Wall will lead us in the direction of icy swords, so let's go there. We might get wet, though. All right. Ooh, I need to catch my breath for a second. How am I doing here, Quinn? How's the chat?
The chat's doing good.
Give
And
me
you're doing pretty good.
Cool, man. Read a couple things from the chat to buy me some time here.
Let's see. Someone mentioned Moses, who doesn't want to live to see the promised lands. Not sure how that relates.
Oh, because I was saying Jon won't live to see the spring, but he'll set it in motion. Yeah, that's very Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And Jojo Lady Dane says that Jack is a diminutive form of John in Britain. That is true. And in America as well. My uncle is named John and went by Jack. So there you go.
Everyone's saying Happy Pride.
Oh, yes. Happy Pride, indeed.
Is that today? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like I always hear about the SF Pride. Yeah, it's Pride Month. So, yeah, it must be today. Yeah. The San Francisco Pride Parade is like almost gotten out of hand to the point where the actual people that want to march are kind of upset because like every yuppie comes in from the suburbs just to like drink and party and be stupid. But I guess it's all in support. So, you know, better than like Nazis at the parade or something.
Yeah.
All right. So it looks like it's time for some flamenco. And by the way, I know hopefully none of you are playing the unofficial official Song of Ice and Fire drinking game, but I do have some Hennessy here, which I use to sort of soften up the sort of clear out the cobwebs. It's a trick I picked up from my wife, who is a singer. So, bottoms up, guys. Icebringer. This section goes out to some more of our earthly avatars of the heavenly houses of heaven. Sir Brian the Returned, the Serpent Bearer, Knight of the Last House, wielder of Red Song, an earthly avatar of heavenly house Ophiuchus. Sir Dionysus of House Galadon, wielder of the Milk Glass Blade, the Just Made, earthly avatar of the heavenly house Virgo and Libra. And the Mystery Knight, known as only as Rusted Revolver, the Lilith Walker, Great Dane Friend, and earthly avatar of Heavenly House Pisces. And Ash Rose, Queen of Sevens, Mistress of Mythology, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Taurus. And shout out to Rusted Revolver, who I believe I saw in the chat. And because he's just a swell guy who's gotten a little too good at puns for his own good, might I add. Okay, so here's another great description of the wall from that. So the rat's back. No, we already did that chapter. Okay, here we are. Icebringer. So here's another great description of the wall from that same Jon chapter of A Game of Thrones that we started with, one which dishes out some more great ice sword and ice moon apocalypse symbolism. It's also just a really nice example of the musicality and the cadence of Martin's writing, which is one of the things I just love about A Song of Ice and Fire.
By the time Jon left the armory, it was almost midday. The sun had broken through the clouds. He turned his back on it and lifted his eyes to the wall, blazing blue and crystalline in the sunlight. Even after all these weeks, the sight of it still gave him the shivers. Centuries of wind-blown dirt had pocketed and scoured it, covering it like film, and it often seemed a pale gray, the color of an overcast sky. But when the sun caught it, on a fair bright day, it shone alive with light, a colossal blue-white cliff that filled up half the sky.
Filling up the sky is actually a bad thing for an ice moon symbol. It's very like when Jon was battling the moon-faced Othor and said its face was against his own, filling the world. Here, it's a colossal blue-white cliff that filled up half the sky, and it's shining alive with light, like dawn. This makes my point about the ice sword symbolism of the wall being used to imply the ice moon disaster. The wall is compared to dawn in the line in which it fills up half the sky. So you can imagine a white, icy sword filling up the sky, and you get the idea. Time to head down to the underground meteor shower shelter. Oh, wait, you don't have a meteor shower shelter? Sounds like a real problem. Returning to the quote, the icy brightness and burning... Excuse me. Returning to the quote, the icy brightness and burning ice motifs, which we cataloged extensively in the Moons of Ice and Fire series, are on central display here, with the wall blazing blue in the sunlight. Blazing is a word used for fire, yet it gives Jon the shivers, because a cold blue blaze is strongly evocative of the others and their cold burning blue star eyes, of course. This is a cold blaze that we're talking about here, and coming next to the ice wall being alive with light, like dawn, it's really suggestive. Not only does it suggest that dawn, the alive with light sword, is the original ice, it also seems to suggest that dawn can indeed catch on fire and truly blaze blue, like the wall does here, or like the swords in Jaime's Weirwood Stump Dream, which burn with silvery blue flame. Ah, there you go. There might be something to that. There's another healthy dose of icy brightness in a quote from A Clash of Kings when Jon sees the wall, and it says, the sun was high in the sky, and the upper third of the wall was crystalline blue from below, reflecting so brilliantly that it hurt the eyes to look on. It's blindingly bright, like the sun, or like a flaming sword. And any time the wall is described as crystalline, we should also think of the ice crystal swords of the others. Oh, and I see the chat is lighting up with ice fire emojis. Hey, Laura, Shakespeare of Thrones, thanks for joining. And by the way, looking at the viewers here, it seems like everybody that tuned in at the beginning has pretty much stayed here, which I really, thanks a lot, guys. It makes me feel awesome. So really appreciate it. And I understand some of you guys might have to leave and catch the rest later or whatever, but the fact that so many of you are sticking around really means a lot. So thanks a lot, guys. So there's another possible likeness between the wall and ice swords here. You'll recall in one of the first quotes I gave you about the wall, Jon and Tyrion were observing it from afar, and the wall was described as a pale blue line across the northern horizon. Well, a moment ago, we read that quote about the wall where it's compared to a frozen river and pitted gray stone, and then called the end of the world. And I mentioned that, oh, the red comet comes up in the very next paragraph as a suggestion of just how the wall might help to end the world. Now, bearing in mind the pale blue line description of the wall, Here is that reference to the red comet.
The morning sky was streaked by thin gray clouds, but the pale red line was there behind them. The Black Brothers had dubbed the wanderer Mormont's torch, saying, only half in jest, that the gods must have sent it to light the old man's way through the haunted forest. The comet's so bright you can see it by day now, Sam said, shading his eyes with a fistful of books.
With a fistful of books! Not quite the same as a fistful of steel. Anyways, pale red line, meet pale blue line. Remember that the comet is really an ice and fire duality symbol because it's a flying piece of icy stone that looks to be on fire. You could look at it therefore as burning ice, and thus it makes sense to compare it to the wall, which is like an icy snake sword that blazes bright, alive with light. Meteors that burn up in the atmosphere actually do appear bluish in color, usually, so perhaps we'll have lots of pale blue lines in the sky for our hashtag Ice Moon Apocalypse. All right, so now let's get to the good stuff. That's right, I've just been beating around the bush this whole time. In this section and the next, we're going to be parsing just about every part of a certain Jon chapter in A Dance with Dragons. It's Jon 1, actually, which is the one that begins with Jon's most elaborate wolf dream, and also includes him arguing with Stannis about manning the forts on the wall, and Melisandre's infamous warning to Jon, which echoes in his head throughout the book leading up to his assassination.
You would do well to keep your wolf close beside you. Ice I see, and daggers in the dark, blood frozen red and hard, and naked steel. It was very cold.
We're going to start with Jon arguing with Stannis over the map, which begins a great series of parallel quotes, which both compare the wall to Lightbringer and imply a Lightbringer meteor striking the wall. So, Jon and Stannis are arguing over how to man the forts on the wall as they stand over a map of Westeros. And Stannis draws his fake cold Lightbringer to threaten and intimidate Jon, basically. And it says,
The king laid his bright blade down on the map, along the wall, its steel shimmering like sunlight on water.
Okay, so there are two ways to interpret this, and they are not mutually exclusive by any means. So laying the Lightbringer sword down on top of the wall might simply show us that the wall and the Lightbringer comet are parallel symbols. And in this sense, we might see the entire wall as the sword in the darkness, which the Night's Watch wield. I didn't come up with that. That's actually an old form idea. But the idea of Stannis's bright blade shimmering like sunlight, but nevertheless giving off no heat, is a very similar description to the wall, which is bright and shimmering in the sunlight, but obviously gives off no heat. So Stannis' sword and the wall are very similar, and then Stannis lays the sword down on the wall, and they're both icy and bright. So this would be a match for the Dawn as original ice theory, which would be that which would in that case be a cold and bright sword. So, sorry, if Dawn is original ice, then it would be a cold and bright sword, which matches the wall and Stannis' sword. And of course, I see Stannis wielding a cold, bright sword as a potential evidence for Night's King wielding Dawn, because Stannis is a big Night's King parallel. Hopefully you all understood that. Sorry, that sounded a little confused. But so the other way we could interpret Stannis laying his Lightbringer down along the wall is actually more apocalyptic. We could see this as a depiction of a Lightbringer meteor smashing into the wall. Stannis is a Night's King, dark solar figure, so he's the right sort of guy to slam a Lightbringer into an ice moon symbol. This seems a great call out to Suitor, by the way, with Stannis this time as Suitor. The map-sized Westeros below them actually does make Stannis feel like a giant, just like Suitor, and he has a sword that can span the entire continent. In A Song of Ice and Fire, of course, the only swords that are that big are the meteor kind. Stannis also drummed his fingers on the map in this conversation, those words exactly. And he does it again later in A Dance with Dragons when he and Jon are again talking over the same map. And when a dark Azor Ahai uses his hand to drum the land, well, I think you know where that means. Boom doom, boom doom. together with the sword placed over the map on the wall, it's pretty friggin' ominous. It reminds me a lot of the scene where Stannis actually does draw his Lightbringer at the wall in front of the defeated wildlings.
Stannis Baratheon drew Lightbringer. The sword glowed red and yellow and orange, alive with light. Jon had seen the show before, but not like this. Never before like this. Lightbringer was the sun made steel. When Stannis raised the blade above his head, men had to turn their heads or cover their eyes. Horses shied, and one threw his rider. The blaze in the fire pit seemed to shrink before the storm of light, like a small dog cowering before a larger one. The wall itself turned red and pink and orange as waves of color danced across the ice. Is this the power of King's blood?
Pretty much. Actually, it's the power of glamour and sorcery. So the wall here is lighting up just like Stannis' sword, which again is a Lightbringer that produces no heat. And its storm of light here is entirely Melisandre's glamour and not the result of wildfire or any other sort of fire. So it literally is blinding like the sun and yet not hot at all, just like the wall. The alive with light descriptor now is applied to Stannis' sword when we just saw it applied to the wall. So another great comparison. And of course, Dawn itself is a luminescent sword that gives off no heat, which there's no heat that we know of, and which is obviously the original Ice of House Stark. So as with the map scene, it's hard to say whether this scene is simply Stannis showing us that the wall is similar, excuse me, or comparable to his cold alive with light sword, or if he's showing us that a real meteor sword is destined to light up the wall with actual fire. Either way, it's very similar to Stannis laying his Lightbringer on the map across the wall. It's still shimmering like sunlight on water. Sunlight on water kind of sounds like a flood is coming from the wall when the sword strikes it. When Stannis drew his sword at the wall, it says waves of color danced across the ice. So again, we have the suggestion of melting water coming from the wall when the shining sword is nearby. In that same scene where Stannis lays Lightbringer across the map or across the wall on the map, it also says,
the map lay between them like a battleground, drenched by the colors of the glowing sword.
Drenched. Sorry, guys. Little frog here. Drenched, you say? Very interesting. Very interesting. Sounds like we'll need boats or something. There's also that second scene with Jon and Stannis talking over the map, and in that scene, we get these lines.
Jon moved the map. Candles had been placed at its corners to keep it from rolling up. A finger of warm wax was puddling across the Bay of Seals, slow as a glacier.
So the wall certainly looks like the edge of a glacier, one with a very sharp edge, granted. And here we see a glacier oozing out of the north like an icy tide. Again, it's ominous and speaks of a cold flood coming from the wall. What's really cool is that when Jon sees an actual glacier, he mistakes it for the wall for a moment. This is Jon's vision through the eyes of Ghost during his journey into the Frostfangs with Qhorin Halfhand.
A vast blue-white wall plugged one end of the vale, squeezing between the mountains as if it had shouldered them aside, and for a moment he thought he had dreamed himself back to Castle Black. Then he realized he was looking at a river of ice several thousands of feet high. Under that glittering cold cliff was a great lake, its deep cobalt waters reflecting the snow-capped peaks that ringed it.
Not only is this glacier compared to the wall, it's also called a frozen river of ice, just as the wall is. And although the lake beneath the glacier is really at the foot of the glacier, the wording makes it sound like the lake is under the glacier, which gives us the familiar frozen pond motif. The frozen pond motif was first defined by the Others' first appearance in a Game of Thrones prologue, where we saw that the ice armor of the Others is reflective like a mirror, and the reflected images of their surroundings ran like moonlight on water with every step it took. But of course, that armor is made out of ice, so really we're talking about a frozen pond. and also in the prologue, their speech is described as being like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, which kind of makes you think of Lucifer being set free from the frozen lake, which is exactly what the others kind of represent. So not an accident. And the winter lake symbol is important. So although the wall doesn't have water trapped inside it like a frozen lake, it is, of course, a big piece of frozen water. And if it's hit by a meteor or a comet, most of it would actually vaporize and melt instantly. And then we'd indeed get a huge flood. The cracking of the ice of the wall will also lead to an invasion of the others. So we can see that actually, in a way, the cracking ice of a winter lake voices of the others, combined with their frozen pond symbolism, kind of foreshadows the cracking of the wall, which is like a frozen river. And if I could just step away from all the sort of intricacies, just think about it real basically. The other's speech is like the cracking of ice. And what do they want to do? They want to crack the wall and march on you. I'm really curious to see if Ravenous Reader's killing word theory makes an appearance here. And we have Night's King or the others using some sort of speech to crack the wall. That'd be awesome. That would be literally like their cracking ice speech. But, that could just be taking the symbolism too far. We'll have to see. Hat tip to Ravenous Reader, the poetess of the Ninny Mounds. All right, so then we have the Milkwater River. We've talked about the white knife a bunch of times. And the Milkwater is kind of a symbolic twin to the white knife. It also shows us the frozen pond symbolism. And then, of course, we also have a tributary stream of the Milkwater, which really nails it.
At the bottom of the slope, they came upon a little stream flowing down from the foothills to join the Milkwater. It looked all stones and glass, though they could hear the sound of water running beneath the frozen surface. Rattleshirt led them across, shattering the thin crust of ice.
Stones and glass and ice are an interesting combination because dawn is as pale as milk glass, made from a pale stone, and was once the original ice, as we all know for an absolute fact of canon, settled beyond all debate. All right, so compare that to the phraseology here. A milkwater river of stone and glass and ice versus an icy white sword made from a pale stone that looks like milk glass. Again, it's very similar to the white knife, freezing hard when Brandon Ice Eyes Stark comes to town. Frozen rivers keep reminding us of dawn, basically. The wall, of course, is a frozen river and is described in the same alive with light language as dawn. So you can see how we've got a new symbolism three-way or four-way or five-way happening here. Lots of fingers jamming in each other with symbolism. And all right. So, and now I will unveil a quote about the Milkwater River that I've been saving for something like 2.5 years. And yes, I have been storing up notes in preparation to write about the others for that long.
The world was gray darkness, smelling of pine and moss and cold. Pale mist rose from the black earth as the riders threaded their way through the scatter of stones and scraggly trees, down toward the welcoming fires strewn like drools across the floor of the river valley below. There were more fires than Jon could count, hundreds of fires, thousands, a second river of flickery lights along the banks of the icy white milkwater. The fingers of his sword hand opened and closed.
Okay, so the recurring line about Jon's sword hand is kind of the clue that tips us off as to what these two parallel rivers symbolize. Swords. The icy white milkwater is a great analog for dawn and the wall, as we just saw, and alongside it is a second river, thousands of flickery lights that look like fiery jewels against the surrounding darkness. That is our dark Lightbringer, darkness punctuated by flame. It's basically like black fire is described, which is black flame with little specks of red and gold. And it's laid out next to its opposite, the icy white milkwater. They are ready to have a sword fight with one sword. And here we have these two river swords laid out next to each other. So there you go. Now, just as we've seen the white knife and milk water symbolize dawn a few times, we've seen on more than one occasion that the black water rush symbolizes the burning black sword that I theorize Azor Ahai to have forged from a black moon meteor, the one from the Bloodstone Emperor myth. As I've pointed out, the name black water seems to allude to the waves of blood and night, drink, which are seen in the folds of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail. The black water rush flows from the God's Eye, which I believe symbolizes the moon-sun eclipse conjunction that seemed to have happened when the Long Night explosion occurred. And thus it makes sense to see the black water rush as representing those waves of darkness and night that emanate from the moon explosion. Then when Rhaegar and Lyanna absconded to conceive Jon, the black water rush froze over, giving us the black ice symbol that comes from Ned's black sword named Ice, which is now Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail, with the waves of night. Finally, we know that Tyrion sets the black water rush on fire at the Battle of the Blackwater, whereupon it becomes the mouth of hell. Ergo, the black water seems an embodiment of the dark Lightbringer, burning black sword symbolism, a perfect opposite to the milk water and white knife rivers. So, to briefly sum up this Icebringer section, I'll simply say that I believe the obvious reason to bring rivers of various kinds into the swords and meteors lines of symbolism is to describe the water-based effects of the meteor attacks, old and new. The first one brought figurative waves of darkness and then literal tidal waves in that darkness. So waves of night is a sensible thing to include in Lightbringer symbolism. Plus there's all that delightful moonblood wordplay. Now the meteor attack to come, involving the ice moon, seems destined to break the wall and melt a whole lot of ice, causing rivers of ice to flow. The wall is like a nice sword, so when a moon meteor comes streaking down to collide with it, it will be like the clashing of two swords. And with the breaking of those two swords will come a big splash and a flood. Now, the other way that frozen rivers and lakes play into this, plays into this is more metaphorical and has to do with that idea of plunging through an icy lake to represent a certain kind of death transformation, as well as that icy lake cracking voice of the others. All right, time for the next section. I think I'm going to grab a Red Bull. Quinn, will you do me a favor and read off some of the funny, witty people from the chat and their comments while I go grab my drink?
Sure thing. What's going on, people in the comments? Let's see. Tyrion uses green-eyed Lannister fire. Frozen time werewood seeing ability. Loving the stream. Well, I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's nice to talk to y'all, you guys. Nice to see you. I'm doing good, working on some videos to put up on my channel. Got some Dune stuff coming. 2 Dune videos this month, guys. Lovecraft podcast. Well, it's the Lovecraft stuff in A Song of Ice and Fire. I also read off a really cool Lovecraft story and talk about it, but tying it into A Song of Ice and Fire mostly. There's a Mist of Avalon video. Thanks everyone. I'm glad you're enjoying all the readings.
They're asking you to tell a story about me, Quinn.
Tell a story about you.
LML smokes a lot of weed. The end.
The end. It's true.
Kidding aside, though, if you guys have seen the movie Dune, you thought it was kind of cool, maybe haven't read the books, Quinn's Dune videos are a great excuse to get into the books because the books are really cool. definitely bring a lot more to the movie in the same way that Song of Ice and Fire brings a lot more than Game of Thrones, the TV show. And
Yes.
it's one of those seminal works of fantasy science fiction, which is really kind of one big genre. And it's got a lot of classic symbolism. It's got some amazing character building. It's got amazing world building, obviously. Quinn would call it the best in science fiction history. And
Definitely.
there is a ton of A Song of Ice and Fire Dune parallels, specifically with Blood Raven and the God King, Duke Leto Atreides II, as Quinn likes to talk about. So definitely check that out.
Definitely check out my channel.
Yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you? Okay. And hey, I just realized I'm wearing a pink shirt on Pride, so I guess I'm in spirit subconsciously. Woo! Let me. And I got some questions about this one. This is yes, this is hipster Baphomet. He has glasses on, and he says, "Keep learning science, kids, because science is good." Okay, so next section. That means it's time for some flamenco guitar. A shock of cold. This next section is brought to you by some more of our earthly avatars of the heavenly houses. Queen Cameron, Lady of the Twilight, Keeper of the Astral Cats, earthly avatar of heavenly house Aries. The Child of the Forest known as Feathercrow, the Weircat Dryad, earthly avatar of heavenly house Capricorn. Sarah Stark of the Wolf's Blood, the Shining Hand of Asphoria, and earthly avatar of heavenly house Sagittarius. And I'll also add a thank you to Sir Dale the Winged Fist, the last scion of House Mud and captain of the dread ship Black Squirrel, a member of the Sacred Order of the Black Hand. One of my oldest running patrons. Thanks, Dale. You're the man. All right. So, a shock of cold. Next up, we have an absolute gem of a scene which showcases a ton of frozen stream symbolism, icy moon symbolism, dawn symbolism, ice sword symbolism, Jon and death rebirth symbolism. Oh, and there's something about the wall falling, naturally. That would be the scene where Jon and Corn ride through a waterfall and into a mountain cave to try to evade the wildlings and Orell's eagle. Before they get to the cave, however, we've got to talk about a couple things. They light one of those ground zero bonfires that we were looking at in a grove of ash.
Jon went to cut more branches, snapping each one in two before tossing it into the flames. The tree had been dead a long time, but it seemed to live again in the fire, as fiery dancers woke within each stick of wood to whirl and spin in their glowing gowns of yellow, red, and orange.
There are these, so guys, my keyboard has just run out of batteries, it would seem. So let me just grab my other keyboard, because I have been chatting with chat a little bit. That's what you get with Bluetooth. Batteries run out. A couple people have commented that I have a new web camera, which I do. The Logitech C920. Oh, that's right. This Apple keyboard doesn't work with my Microsoft computer. One second.
It's all live. That's how you can tell this isn't pre-recorded.
We got the pinch hitter keyboard here. Yeah, well, I have batteries, but they're in the other room, and it's quicker to switch keyboards than to change batteries. Ah, yes, thought of that. Okay, so in the last quote that Quinn read like 5 minutes ago, We had fiery dancers waking with each stick of wood to whirl and spin in their glowing gowns of yellow, red, and orange. And if you've listened to In a Grove of Ash, you know that that is the same language that we see at Dany's alchemical wedding when she wakes the dragons. She sees fiery dancers spinning in gowns of red, yellow, and orange. I mean, it's the same language. And the reason why is because this fire here with Jon and Corran also represents the sun, comet, fire, moon collision, just like Dany's dragon hatching scene does. And just like all of these Ember in the Ashes bonfires, not Ember in the Ashes, I'm sorry, but the sort of the fiery sorcerers waking from the bonfire scene. The tree living again in the flames would be a reference to Azor Ahai being reborn inside the Weirwood Net, just like Jon will be, which seems to happen when Nissa Nissa is killed and the moon cracked. So think about the storm god's meteor thunderbolt. It set the tree ablaze with the fire of the gods. So you've got the burning tree and the meteor being juxtaposed. And then the Grey King possesses the fire of the gods. And that's the same thing we see here. We see fiery sorcerers living again in the fire, which is the burning tree, fire of the gods symbol. And if you want to know more about that, In a Grove of Ash, Weirwood Compendium 4. Point is, this represents the fire moon explosion. And then Jon and Corran, after lighting the fire moon bonfire, they immediately ride away into the cold night, like black meteor swords flying through the darkness towards the ice moon.
Jon pulled on his gloves again and raised his hood. Even the horses seemed reluctant to leave the fire. The sun was long gone, and only the cold shine of the half moon remained to light their way over the treacherous ground that lay behind them. He did not know what Corran had in mind, but perhaps it was a chance. He hoped so. I do not want to play the Oathbreaker, even for good reason.
Jon doesn't want to be an Oathbreaker. He wants to be an Oathkeeper. Oathkeeper is his father's sword, after all, and black ice is Jon's symbol. Jon and Corran, as Night's Watch brothers, already have black sword symbolism, as all Night's Watch brothers do. So calling Jon not an Oathbreaker is really just a sly way to reinforce the black sword motif and make us think of Ned's sword, now Oathkeeper. I'm sure you noticed the cold silver shine of the half moon lighting their way, because Jon and Corran are about to symbolically enter the ice moon. And that's pretty explicit. It's a cold moon right there in the sky. Now, on their way, they have lovely scenery to pass through as, quote, a narrow defile where an icy little stream emerged from between two mountains passes by. Corran notes that the water's icing up as, quote, they followed the moonlit ribbon of stream back to its source. We see that icicles bearded the stony banks, but Jon could still hear the sound of rushing water beneath a thin, hard crust. That's nice because it's combining the snowbeard symbolism with that of the frozen stream and the cold moonlight. Then we get to the waterfall, where we see the entry wound of the meteor, the scratch across the face of the ice moon.
A great jumble of fallen rock blocked their way partway up, where a section of the cliff face had fallen, but the sure-footed little Garrans were able to pick their way through. Beyond the walls pinched in sharply, and the stream led them to the foot of a tall, twisting waterfall. The air was full of mist, like the breath of some vast cold beast. The tumbling water shone silver in the moonlight. Jon looked about in dismay. There is no way out. He and Corran might be able to climb the cliffs, but not with the horses. He did not think they would last long afoot. Quickly now, the half-hand commanded. The big man on the small horse rode over the ice-slick stones, right into the curtain of water and vanished. When he did not reappear, Jon put his heels onto his horse and went after. His Garran did his best to shy away. The falling water slapped at them with frozen fist, and the shock of cold seemed to stop Jon's breath. Then he was through, drenched and shivering, but through.
So once again, Jon is ice dragon food, as he ignores the breath of the vast cold beast and enters the curtain of moonlit icy water anyway. which seems to stop Jon's breath. So this is all going according to plan. When Jon actually dies in A Dance with Dragons, he never felt the fourth knife, only the cold. And when Varamir dies, it's like plunging through the surface of an icy lake. Both are depictions of an Azor-Ahai black meteor person symbolically entering the ice moon and becoming locked in the ice, which is a death transformation. Drink. In fact, look, and by the way, I don't endorse the drinking game at all. In fact, look at the quote from Varamir's death and compare it to this waterfall scene.
True death came suddenly. He felt a shock of cold, as if he had been plunged into the icy waters of a frozen lake. Then he found himself rushing over moonlit snows with his packmates close behind him.
I mean, it's so similar. The shock of the cold seemed to stop Jon's breath as he walks through a moonlit waterfall, compared to he felt a shock of cold, as if he had been plunged into the icy waters of a frozen lake, which is followed by moonlit snows. Varamir then lands in his wolf, One Eye, just as Jon's spirit is presumably flying to his wolf after his stabbing these past 6 years. In other words, this scene at the waterfall foreshadows Jon's death in the frozen lake language of Varamir's death, which makes a ton of sense. Better yet, the breath of a vast cold beast language parallels the scenes we looked at earlier, where Jon is being swallowed by the ice dragon-like wall, which is also like a frozen river or stream. I hope you're beginning to see how this works. The ice moon is like a frozen body of water, and anything going into a frozen lake or river is probably going into the ice moon symbolically. And here I will take a quick break from the script to just give you a little tidbit. Ice moons are a real thing in the solar system. Europa is the most famous one. And by the way, George uses the wordplay of Europa in Euron and a couple other places. And Euron has a moon face with a blue eye. But that aside, ice moons are like frozen ponds because the way that they are constructed is like this. It's basically a big rocky moon at the core, just like our moon, then covered in ocean, a global ocean of either cold water or methane, liquid methane, with then like a 60-mile thick crust of ice all the way around. So an ice moon is literally like a frozen pond. And I do think that this is something that George was thinking about because A, he's into science fiction and keeps up on this kind of stuff. And Europa is by far the most famous ice moon anywhere in the universe and has been something that's been talked about for a long time. And Europa, Jupiter also has Io, which is a fire moon. So I'm going to talk about this more on the live stream. It's like a little tidbit of research that I had that I sort of cut out of an essay, but fire moons and ice moons do exist. The fire moons are like floating volcanoes. The ice moons are just like I described. So he's actually recreating that whole geology here, but bit of an aside. Anyways, so again, here I have to point to the others, having voices like the cracking of ice on a winter lake. And I would suggest that this is alluding to the ice moon as a frozen lake, and the others as cold meteor stars that pour forth from the crack across the face of that ice moon. So I think we've established that Jon is symbolically dying and entering the ice moon here by walking through the moonlit waterfall. So let's see what Jon finds inside the cave. First, and by the way, if you're thinking of Alyssa's Tears, another frozen waterfall of ice moon symbolism, that's good because same idea. So anyways, Corin, when they're in the cave, talks about how, quote, he heard a brother tell how he followed a shadow cat through these falls, which compares to the Night's Watch brothers to shadow cats. And that's the same thing that Jon did when he and Corin crept along the ledge before attacking Ygritte's company, if you recall, at the campfire in the Frostfangs. Shadow cats fit the Lion of Night, Black Dragon archetype, as exemplified by Princess Rhaenys' black cat named Balerion, which is why the black shadows of the Night's Watch are compared to them, because there's the same black meteor symbol. In astronomy terms, the point is that black meteor symbols are what enter the ice moon, whether they're shadow cats or black Night's Watch brothers who are like shadows. Picking up the quote, we have Corin speaking.
There is a way through the heart of the mountain. Come dawn, if they have not found us, we will press on. The first watch is mine, brother. Corin seated himself on the sand, his back to the wall, no more than a vague black shadow in the gloom of the cave. Over the rush of the falling waters, Jon heard a soft sound of steel on leather that could only mean that the half-hand had drawn his sword. He took off his wet cloak, but it was too cold and damp here to strip down any further. Ghost stretched out beside him and licked his glove before curling up to sleep. Jon was grateful for his warmth. He wondered if the fire was still burning outside, or if it had gone out by now. If the wall should ever fall, all the fires will go out. The moon shone through the curtain of falling water to lay a shimmering pale stripe across the sand. But after a time, that too faded and went dark. Sleep came at last, and with it nightmares. He dreamed of burning castles and dead men rising, unquiet from their graves. It was still dark when Corin woke him. While the half-hand slept, Jon sat with his back to the cave wall, listening to the water and waiting for the dawn.
So hopefully you guys are well trained enough in mythical astronomy that you caught a lot of what is going on there. Corin, the Black Shadow, draws his sword, which symbolizes the Black Meteor Sword's penetration of the ice moon. This is the same as Rhaegar's Black Lance penetrating the Blue Rose Crown. It's the same idea. Then we get the requisite obvious foreshadowing of the wall falling. And this is really the last quote that I have stored away about the wall falling. I don't think there are any more. So if you know of any others that I missed, let me know. I saw someone in the chat earlier mention this quote. And yeah, I was saving it. So after we have this foreshadowing of the wall falling, they talk about, we get a strong ice moon meteor symbol as, quote, the moon shone through the curtain of falling water to lay a shimmering pale stripe across the sand. So that is ice moon sending down a beam of light, and it even lands in the sand, like Stannis' Lightbringer, stuck in the sand of Dragonstone. And the word dawn is conspicuously mentioned in the very next paragraph. We do not fail to notice. We also can't fail to notice that Jon dreams of burning castles and dead men rising from their graves. This couldn't be any stronger of a call out to Winterfell's burning, a scene which heavily foreshadows Jon's resurrection as a dragon person waking from the crypts. The burning castle is the ice moon, but only when Jon the sleeping dragon wakes from it in fire. This will happen when the wall falls, it seems safe to say at this point. The idea of Jon and Corin as black shadows inside the ice moon, which is depicted here, has parallels to a couple of scenes at the wall with Melisandre that you may recall, where certain prominent figures conspired to cast their shadows onto or into the wall. We don't need to quote all of those again, but here's the most relevant example from A Dance with Dragons, with Melisandre speaking to Jon Snow.
Every man who walks the earth casts a shadow on the world. Some are thin and weak, others long and dark. You should look behind you, Lord Snow. The moon has kissed you and etched your shadow upon the ice 20 feet tall. Jon glanced over his shoulder. The shadow was there, just as she had said, etched in moonlight against the wall.
Placing Jon's shadow inside the ice of the wall is very clear dead Jon inside the ice shells foreshadowing. But of course, there's also great mythical astronomy going on here too. Think of Jon once again as the black fire moon meteor hurling towards the ice moon, just like when Corin and Jon rode away from the ground zero bonfire to enter the waterfall ice moon symbol. As Jon kisses the moon, the fire moon it would be, his shadow is then etched into the ice of the wall, which represents the ice moon, of course. So it's just like Jon being swallowed into the ice dragon's gullet when he walks into the wall, but with the moon-kissing language of the Carthene prophecy added in for effect. We might also think of the Night's King here, kissing Night's Queen and giving his seed and soul to be locked in her ice. Now, the very first place that dead Jon's, or maybe not the first, but the first place that people found the dead Jon in the ice cells foreshadowing, and that was Radio Westeros, may have been the scene where Jon goes to visit Cregan Karstark, who Jon had imprisoned in the ice cells. That's the scene where Wick Whittlestick, Jon's eventual killer, opens the door to the ice cell so that Jon can, quote, slip inside, which is followed by the infamous line, Jon Snow could see his own reflection dimly inside the icy walls. It's more than just Jon's body being stored in an ice cell. It's a depiction of Jon as the dragon locked in ice, a sleeping dragon inside a cold moon. Now, Cregan himself, and this is the next level of this scene, actually foreshadows Jon's death and rebirth from the ice. So the Karstarks are an offshoot branch of House Stark, which Cregan brings up in this conversation. And Cregan is the name of one of the mightiest and most famous Starks in recent history, Cregan Stark, who signed the Pact of Ice and Fire with Jacaerys Valerion during the Dance of the Dragons, and whom Aemon the Dragon Knight called the finest swordsman he had ever faced. Now, Cregan Karstark, on the other hand, is not so grand. However, he does have very noteworthy symbolism. He's freezing, he's howling like a wolf, and given that Jon is seeing himself in the ice cells in the scene, I think we can look at Cregan and simply see a Stark-blooded person turning into a wolf and undergoing ice transformation, which of course would simply be more foreshadowing for Jon's body being in the cells while his spirit is in his wolf for a time before he's reborn. And then after Jon slips inside Cregan's ice cell, there's even more symbolism along these lines.
In one corner of the cell, a heap of furs was piled up almost to the height of a man. Karstark, said Jon Snow, wake up. The furs stirred, some had frozen together, and the frost that covered them glittered when they moved. An arm emerged, then a face, brown hair, tangled and matted and streaked with gray, 2 fierce eyes, a nose, a mouth, a beard. Ice caked the prisoner's mustache, clumps of frozen snot. Snow. His breath steamed in the air, fogging the ice behind his head.
Awesome. You're doing great, Quinn, by the way. Thank you, man. Okay, so this scene is basically showing us a frozen wolf turning into an angry, snow-bearded Stark wolfman. The first thing he says is snow, which seems like a clever clue about Cregan foreshadowing Jon's own fate. And as if to underscore this further, Cregan, who was just howling like a wolf, goes on a tirade and calls Jon half a wolf and reminds him that Stark and Karstark are one blood. So they're both emphasized as wolf people here. Jon, of course, seems destined to have his second life inside Ghost interrupted so he can wake up in his resurrected body. And this brings us to that dream that Jon had one time of a moon that screams snow at him, then turns into a raven and lands on his chest as he wakes up. In terms of Icebringers, that's a real humdinger. Okay, we've come to the last section, folks. We have 142 people watching, and those of you who have stayed this long are in for a real fucking treat, let me tell you. But before we do that, my buddy Wiz the Smith has unearthed yet another end-of-the-world wall quote. I told you that I had them all. Lo and behold, there's another one. I can type, which I can't. Okay, this is, no. That wasn't the exact wording. Hey, Wiz, can you pull up the exact wording of that one so I can pull it up in the Search of Ice and Fire and read it? Okay, so moving along, we're talking about, like I said, I saved the best for last. Those of you who have stayed with me this long, you're in for a treat because it's time for a flurry of corn and 1 roast raven. A flurry of corn and 1 roast raven. This section is brought to you by some members of the Sacred Order of the Black Hand. Sir Stoyles of Long Branch, Seeker of Pale Blood. Mallory Sand, Storm Witch, Rider of Zulfric, the Black Beast. Matthias Mormont, the Sea Goat of the Bottomless Depths. Count Magpie the Rude, the Dinky Giant, Hornblower of the Onslow Fjord, the Lady of Stellar Reason and Maleficence, and Lord Brandon Brewer of Castle Blackroon, sworn alesmith to House Stark, Grand Maester of the Zithomancer's Guild, and Keeper of the Bells. Cool. Very cool. Corn! All right, let's see here. Oh, we've got the chat's going crazy with sex jokes. That's all right. I will leave you all to your fun. Okay, so a flurry of corn and 1 roast raven. Now, if I had my druthers, we will see Jon's resurrection occur with the reappearance of the comet and or that comet striking the ice moon, like I've been saying. As above, so below, right? After all, Jon's spirit will be awaiting resurrection inside his wolf, and the most clear ice moon disaster foreshadowing of all does come as Jon wakes up from a wolf dream from a dance with dragons. Better yet, this wolf dream is kicking off the chapter that we looked at earlier, where Stannis lays his Lightbringer down on the map across the wall, which already seems like killer hashtag Ice Moon Apocalypse foreshadowing. But you ain't seen nothing yet, let me tell you. This is the opening of Jon 1 of A Dance with Dragons, although we will be skipping certain lines to highlight the language that has to do with the wall and the moon. If you listen, you'll spot the inspiration for the original title of this episode, those of you who know what that was. Go ahead, Quinn.
The white wolf raced through a black wood beneath a pale cliff as tall as the sky. The moon ran with him, slipping through a tangle of bare branches overhead, across the starry sky. Snow, the moon murmured. The wolf made no answer. Snow crunched beneath his paws. The wind sighed through the trees. Snow, the moon called down again. Cackling, the white wolf padded along the man trail beneath the icy cliff. The taste of blood was on his tongue, and his ears rang to the song of the 100 cousins. Snow, the moon insisted. The white wolf ran from it, racing toward the cave of night where the sun had hidden, his breath frosting in the air. On starless nights, the great cliff was as black as stone, a darkness towering high above the wide world. But when the moon came out, it shimmered, pale and icy, as a frozen stream. Snow. An icicle tumbled from a branch. The white wolf turned and bared his teeth. Snow. His fur rose bristling as the woods dissolved around him. Snow, snow, snow. He heard the beat of wings. Through the gloom a raven flew. It landed on Jon Snow's chest with a thump and scrabbling of claws. Snow, it screamed into his face.
You were having trouble with that one because you were being overcome with the unbelievable Ice Moon Apocalypse foreshadowing. It was boggling your mind as you were trying to read the quote. I understand.
Absolutely.
So, snow, the moon insisted. No, really. Snow. It's coming. I'm telling you, from the moon. Snow from the moon. Here it comes. I mean, that was just the abbreviated quote, but consider the main lines I pulled here. The moon says snow to Jon 5 times in the wolf dream, then 3 more times as the dream fades out, and once again as the moon becomes the raven when Jon wakes up. In other words, Jon is hearing the raven say snow while he's in the wolf dream, and in the dream, it seems like the moon is saying snow. And then when Jon wakes, the screaming raven lands on Jon's chest with a thump. So it's basically like the moon just fell out of the sky and woke Jon up, all while screaming, snow. Snow, the moon insisted. No, really, it's coming. Anyways, so if there is indeed to be a future moon disaster event, I am basically certain at this point that it has to coincide with Jon's resurrection or be in some way tied to Jon's resurrection, because symbolically, they're the same thing. To me, the line about the white wolf racing through towards the cave of night where the sun had hidden reads like temporarily dead Solar King Jon's spirit being in the underworld, the cave of night, for a time, and about Ghost playing a key part in his resurrection. And these are things that we basically already know will happen, but their inclusion in the dream serves to tip us off that this is about Jon being dead and inside Ghost, and in the Cave of Night, and then resurrected. Notice the sequence on the fourth cry of snow. The moon says snow, then an icicle, an ice moon, meteor, falls down from a branch and makes Ghost bare his teeth. And then Jon's consciousness pulls away from Ghost as he wakes to the raven landing on his chest. So essentially, imagine the icicle as the snow falling from the moon, and the raven that lands on Jon's chest as a continuation of the falling meteor, which depicts the landing. And then Jon wakes up. It's a moon meteor alarm clock. You better not sleep through that one. So think back to that scene where Jon walks into the tunnel through the wall, and it's like walking into the gullet of the ice dragon. Inside, Jon saw Donald Noy and Mag the Mighty locked in a mutual death grip, and then walked on the other side to notice that large sheets of ice had cracked off in the fire, and thinks about how it just looks like it wants to crush you in general. This scene with Jon waking from the wolf dream sends the same message. Jon being reborn from the ice will probably be linked to whatever moon disaster and wall disaster events Martin may have planned. I know I keep harping on this, but I mean, it's just want to point out how many times we're sent this message. And speaking of wall disaster foreshadowing, I'm sure you noticed that the wall features prominently all through Jon's wolf dream here. I especially love the line, "When the moon came out, it shimmered pale and icy as a frozen stream." The ambiguous wording makes it sound as though the moon is coming out of the sky like a frozen stream. And of course, frozen streams make us think of frozen river sword, of the frozen river sword symbolism that we've just been talking about, which implies the moon coming out of the sky like a frozen sword or like a white knife. On the whole, there are lots of ice moon meteor references here in Jon's dream. The raven landing on Jon's chest, the falling icicle, and the idea of a moon falling like a frozen stream. But really, I'm beating around the bush in terms of foreshadowing of the destruction of the wall. Let's pick up the end of the dream as Jon wakes up.
Snow, snow, snow. He heard the beat of wings. Through the gloom, a raven flew. It landed on Jon's chest with a thump and a scrabbling of claws. Snow! It screamed into his face. I hear you. The room was dim, his palate hard. Gray light leaked through the shutters, promising another bleak, cold day. Is this how you woke Mormont? Get your feathers out of my face. Jon wriggled an arm out from under his blankets to shoo the raven off. It was a big bird, old and bold and scruffy, utterly without fear. Snow! It cried, flapping to his bedpost. Snow! Snow! Jon filled his fist with a pillow and let it fly, but the bird took to the air. The pillow struck the wall and burst, scattering stuffing everywhere, just as Dolores Ed Toilette poked his head through the door. Beg pardon, he said, ignoring the flurry of feathers. Shall I fetch my lord some breakfast? Corn, cried the raven. Corn, corn. Raven roast, Jon suggested, and half a pint of ale.
So the first thing that should have jumped out to you is the raven saying snow as Jon throws a feather pillow against a wall, which bursts and creates a flurry of presumably white feathers. The moon raven promised snow, and here it is. It's a flurry of snow. Jon's rage was such that he would have smashed it all in an instant and the world be damned. And here it is. The symbolism implies a flying object striking the wall, followed by snow flurries. And indeed, if a flying object hits the real wall, we will get a snowstorm the likes of which we haven't seen in, 8,000 years, give or take. Now, because the pillow's made of feathers, it really does work well as an extension of the raven, which seems to fall from the moon as Jon wakes up from the wolf dream. Thus, the pillow hitting the wall of the room really does create the image of a moon meteor striking the wall. In actuality, a moon meteor needn't strike a direct hit on the wall to cause it to fall. If the impact were simply close enough to cause any kind of earthquake, close enough to wake giants in the earth, then it might bring the wall down. Put it this way. If there is going to be a moon meteor impact in the remaining books, it's surely going to have to be the mechanism for the wall to fall, because it's very unlikely we'd have two separate, unrelated catastrophic events of that magnitude coming. So either the wall's going to fall by itself, or it's going to fall because meteors hit it. So that's how I'm looking at it. Once again, I will remind you that this is the very same chapter in which Jon and Stannis argue over the map. Stannis lays his Lightbringer down across the wall. So to me, there is little question that this entire chapter, Jon's first in A Dance with Dragons, is all about the impending disaster involving the Wall and the Ice Moon, as well as Jon's resurrection. So wow, right? A moon calling down snow, loads of projectile symbolism, something striking the wall, and then the flurry that was promised, all while Jon wakes from a wolf dream. Are you not entertained, I say? Well, as always, it gets worse. The final piece of this is that the raven, which seems at first to be locked inside the moon and then flies down to land on Jon, in my estimation, also represents Jon's spirit returning to his body. That's right. Think about it. While Jon is dead and his spirit resides in Ghost, Jon is symbolically locked in the ice, which equates to being locked in the ice moon, just as the raven appears to be in the stream. It calls down snow to warn us about snow coming from the moon, but it's not only snow as in ice moon meteors coming from the actual moon, but Jon Snow's spirit returning to his body from the cold afterlife, just as the raven flies to Jon's body and cries out his name, waking him from the wolf dream. There's even a line a page or two later where Jon looks at the raven, who was watching him shrewdly, and says, "Do you take me for your thrall?" Now, the whited corpses of the army of the dead are described as the thralls of the others. So Jon being a thrall to the raven might really be talking about Jon's resurrected body as a thrall to his own spirit. And given that this is Mormont's raven and is likely inhabited by Bloodraven from time to time, is also the implication of resurrected Jon as a thrall to the Weirwood Net, or perhaps you might say servant or champion of the Weirwood Net. And this is in line with our Green Zombies theory all the way, since it suggests that the last hero and his 12 dead companions were actually skin changers or green seers whose resurrections involved weirwoods and the children of the forest magic. So I think the symbolism so far seems to point to Jon waking from death in fire, at least in some sense, just like the King of Winter. And that may be what's being depicted by Jon asking for roast raven for breakfast. If the raven is his spirit, then his spirit is implied as fiery. And when it returns to his body, it's like someone breathing the fiery kiss of life, such as Thoros breathes into Beric. In a sense, Jon will be the roasted raven when he wakes up. Well, okay, the roast crow. He'll be a match for his dream of the moon-faced white wearing Ned's face while burning like straw in a nimbus of flame. And certainly he'll be a match for the burning Scarecrow brothers from his Azor Ahai dream. Aha! Those burning Scarecrow brothers are key because they compare so well to Beric, who's a Scarecrow knight and was resurrected through fire magic and wields a fiery sword, and whom George Martin said is foreshadowing for Jon, and he called him a Firewhite. So a roast raven could be taken also as a phoenix symbol. And I think that makes sense because thinking about Jon as a phoenix, well, he's already implied as a burning scarecrow or a dragon. And come to think of it, those burning Scarecrow brothers in Jon's dream, quote, tumbled down, black cloaks ablaze, as Jon's sword burned red, which actually shows us burning crows flying down from the wall, which is a giant symbol of the ice moon, and just when the red sword comes out to play at the wall. And this is another great suitor destroying the Bifrost Bridge scene. So the idea of Jon eating the roast raven, according to my analysis, also implies Jon absorbing his fiery spirit back in Jon absorbing his fiery spirit back into his cold body. Now, this eating / skin changing symbolism, I didn't just pull it out of my butt. It's actually built up in this chapter as Jon thinks about the fact that Mormont's raven ate Mormont when he died.
That bird is too clever by half. It had been the old bear's companion for long years, but that had not stopped it from eating Mormont's face once he had died.
So Mormont isn't a skin changer, but he is symbolically implied as one by virtue of his always having a talking raven on his shoulder, as we've discussed in the Green Zombie series. So the idea of Mormont's raven eating Mormont implies Mormont's spirit going into his raven. And that's exactly what would have happened to Mormont if he had been a real skin changer bonded to his raven. He would have gone into his raven to start a second life. So this is kind of like the reverse of Jon eating his raven, because Jon's spirit is coming back into his body from his animal. So he eats the animal, as opposed to Mormont's spirit symbolically leaving his body for his animal when he dies. So whoever is doing the eating is absorbing the spirit of the thing being eaten in symbolic terms. And that's pretty easy to understand. Jon will wake his sleeping, when his sleeping corpse can reabsorb his fiery spirit, as suggested by the raven landing on Jon's chest and Jon wanting to roast it and eat it. So the idea of skin changers having a second life inside their animals is also brought up right after Jon wakes up from his dream. And remember, this is coming shortly on the heels of the Varamir Sixskins prologue, which is all about second life. So Jon thinks about Bran and Rickon being dead, but he knows that their wolves are alive because he sensed them in his wolf dream. And it says, he wondered if some part of his dead brothers lived on inside the wolves. And this is a great way to pull all these second life stuff that we learned only a couple chapters earlier in the Varamir prologue into Jon's story arc, and thereby foreshadow his second life inside Ghost. And again, this is coming right on the heels of his most vivid wolf dream that foreshadows his death and resurrection. So, as Jon dresses and leaves his chamber after this dream, there's more talk of waking dragons.
If his grace is doomed, your realm is doomed as well, said Lady Melisandre. Remember that, Lord Snow. It is the one true king of Westeros who stands before you. Jon kept his face a mask, as you say, my lady. Stannis snorted. You spin your words as if everyone were a golden dragon. I wonder how much gold do you have laid by? Gold? Are those the dragons the Red Woman means to wake? Dragons made of gold?
This one is especially funny because, in a certain sense, Jon may be the one true king of Westeros. So here we have Mel being like, hey, look, it's Stannis, the one true king of Westeros. And Jon's like, yeah, sure, whatever you say, lady. As we know, Mel's confidence in Stannis is based on her belief that he is Azor High Reborn. But Jon is actually the real deal, of course. So really, it's Jon who is implied as the one true king here. Jon's face is even described as a mask, further emphasizing Jon as being in disguise. Thus, when Stannis asks Jon how many golden dragons he has hidden away, the joke is that Jon himself is the dragon hidden away in the ice. And he will need to be woken, as we know. Even the idea of Jon's words being like golden dragons implies Jon being able to speak with dragons, like those dream people Dany sees in her House of the Undying dream. Let us teach you the speech of dragon kind. And Jon may actually get a chance to speak to dragons before the story is over. Or try, anyways. So building upon the theme of waking dragons, we see that Stannis' delightful humor about misering dragons leads Jon to ponder the idea of Mel seeking to wake dragons, presumably through human sacrifice. Leading up to this conversation, Jon is actually thinking about how the baby swap he did with Mance's child and Gilly's monster, and he's thinking about how monstrous it would be to give a living child to the fire, especially if his name was Monster. And he thinks about it again while giving his cover story to Mel and Stannis. No, I don't think Monster will be burned to resurrect Jon, and hopefully not Shireen either, but I have long predicted that Ghost's wolf body will have to be burned to send the merged ghost Jon spirit back into Jon's resurrected body. Mel would probably be involved in any such scenario, and we can't rule out the possibility of there being other deaths that pay for Jon's life, either by intention or by accident. And actually, Jon's death and resurrection is foreshadowed strongly at the end of this Jon 1 chapter.
R'hllor sends us what visions he will, but I shall seek for this man, Tormund in the flames. Melisandre's red lips curled into a smile. I have seen you in my fires, Jon Snow. Is that a threat, my lady? Do you mean to burn me, too?
Are you threatening me? I am the great Cornholio. Yeah, I really do love this line. It's an example of Martin pointing at his own wordplay, and yet still hiding something. Jon will indeed find himself in Melisandre's fires, but I have a feeling it's going to be a resurrection fire of some sort, not a sacrifice fire, as Jon thinks here. Now, picking up right where we left off.
You mistake my meaning. She gave him a searching look. I fear that I make you uneasy, Lord Snow. Jon did not deny it. The wall is no place for a woman. You are wrong. I have dreamed of your wall, Jon Snow. Great was the lore that raised it, and great the spells locked beneath its ice. We walk beneath one of the hinges of the world. Melisandre gazed up at it, her breath a warm, moist cloud in the air. This is my place, as it is yours, and soon enough you may have grave need of me. Do not refuse my friendship, Jon. I have seen you in the storm, hard pressed with enemies on every side. You have so many enemies. Shall I tell you their names? I know their names. Do not be so certain. The ruby at Melisandre's throat gleamed red. It is not the foes who curse you to your face that you must fear, but those who smile when you are looking and sharpen their knives when you turn your back. You would do well to keep your wolf close beside you. Ice, I see, and daggers in the dark, blood frozen red and hard and naked steel. It was very cold. It is always cold on the wall. You think so? I know so, my lady. Then you know nothing, Jon Snow, she whispered.
And as you can recall, Jon never felt the fourth knife, but only the cold. It's not an accident that Jon's death is emphasized as colder than cold. I mean, we're talking you know nothing, Jon Snow level of cold here. It's the cold of the ice moon, or you might say the cold of the grave. Martin kind of gave us things in reverse here. First, he foreshadowed Jon's waking in fire and needing Melisandre as a friend, and then he gave us the whole daggers in the dark routine, which foreshadows Jon's death. As for that death scene, it does something similar, giving us resurrection foreshadowing even as Jon is dying. And I'm talking about Jon's actual death scene here. So the key is the giant Woon, Woondeg, Woondar, Woon, or whatever his name is, whom I believe is playing the role of resurrected Jon. So we already saw this once in the In a Grove of Ash episode, again following the Ember in the Ashes line of symbolism, which represents Azor Ahai's ability to spark a great blaze when he's reborn, as Melisandre says. And let me just plug my headphones back in. Okay, so we talked about this at the beginning of the chapter with Sam's Ember that he used to burn the white. So before we have a look at Woon's part in Jon's death scene, let's actually back up and pull the quote from earlier in Dance, where Jon finds Woon with a starving group of wildlings at the Weirwood Grove of Nine.
The fire in the center of the grove was a small, sad thing, ashes and embers, and a few broken branches burning slow and smoky. Even then, it had more life than the wildlings huddled near it. Only one of them reacted when Jon stepped from the brush. That was the child, who began to wail, clutching at his mother's ragged cloak. The woman raised her eyes and gasped. By then the grove was ringed by rangers, sliding past the bone-white trees, steel glinting in black-gloved hands, poised for slaughter. The giant was the last to notice them. He had been asleep, curled up by the fire, but something woke him. The child's cry, the sound of snow crunching beneath black boots, a sudden indrawn breath. When he stirred, it was as if a boulder had come to life. He heaved himself into a sitting position with a snort, pawing at his eyes with a hand as big as Ham's to rub the sleep away, until he saw Iron Emmett, his sword shining in his hand. Roaring, he came leaping to his feet, and one of those huge hands closed around a maul and jerked it up.
So first, the embers and the ashes are compared to the wildlings. Then one of the wildlings, the giant, wakes like a boulder and roars like a dragon. He does this when menaced with a shining sword. We can also see that the rangers penetrating the circle of white trees with their swords as moon penetration symbolism. So after the giant leaps to his feet, Jon tries to reason with him, but is cut off when...
The giant bellowed again, a sound that shook the leaves in the trees and slammed his maul against the ground. The shaft of it was 6 feet of gnarled oak, the head a stone as big as a loaf of bread. The impact made the ground shake. Some of the other wildlings went scrambling for their own weapons.
So the bellowing is important here because it's the horn that wakes the sleeper symbol, just as it is when the Titan of Braavos bellows at sunrise and sunset. And by the way, the next episode coming up in the Blood of the Other series will be all about all the horns. Horn blowing, unicorns, horn blasts, waking sleepers. Anyways, the giant bellows and then makes the ground shake when he wakens up. And I'm sure you noticed that, because this is basically, I mean, this is giants awakening in the earth symbolism. Come to life. It's always been an obvious euphemism or kenning for an earthquake, but here we have an actual giant waking up and making the earth shake. I like how this is paired with the boulder coming to life symbolism. The boulder coming to life is the moon meteor bursting into meteor childbirth, and the earth shaking is when they land. So on the ground and in people terms, the one who awakens when all this exploding happens is Jon, the dragon locked in ice. His shadow, at least, is 20 feet tall when etched in moonlight against the wall, which kind of makes him a giant. But now that we've seen that Woon can play the ember in the ashes and the giant dragon boulder awakening from the ice moon, let's go ahead and flash forward a couple of chapters to Jon's death scene, beginning with Jon having just finished the pink letter speech in the Shield Hall.
Then he heard the shouting, and a roar so loud it seemed to shake the wall. That came from Hardin's tower, my lord, Horse reported. He might have said more, but the scream cut him off. Thou was Jon's first thought, but that was no woman's scream. It was a man in mortal agony.
Cutting in briefly, Hardin's tower is the tower that Val has been kept in Castle Black, and she is obviously an Ice Moon Maiden. So Woon sleeps there as well, and that shows him as being the Ice Moon or inside the Ice Moon. The scream is at first thought to be Val's, which neatly implies it as the icy version of Nissanissa's cry of agony. Then outside, we will indeed find Ice Moon destruction aplenty, picking up right where we left off.
He broke into a run. Horse and Rory raced after him. Is it whites? Asked Rory. Jon wondered. Could his corpse have escaped their chains?
So breaking in again, these are the whites that Jon captured and locked up in the ice cells for research purposes. But if Jon's corpse is locked in the ice cell, as seems to be thoroughly foreshadowed, then the talk here of whites escaping from the ice cells is fairly straightforward foreshadowing of Jon's resurrection from the ice. Now the ruckus is being caused by Woon, of course, not escaped corpses, but I think inserting this line here means that Woon's ruckus is meant to parallel Jon's awakening, as I've been suggesting, which is like a corpse awakening. So picking back up.
The scream had stopped by the time they came to Hardin's tower, but one Weg One Dar One was still roaring. The giant was dangling a body corpse by one leg, the same way Arya used to dangle her own doll when she was small, swinging it like a morning star.
A morning star? God damn! Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Swinging it like a morning star when menaced by vegetables. Arya never tore her dolls into pieces, though. The dead man's sword arm was yards away, the snow beneath it turning red. Let him go, Jon shouted. One, let him go. One did not hear or did not understand. The giant was bleeding himself, with sword cuts on his belly and arm. He swung the dead knight against the gray stone of the tower, again and again, until the man's head was red and pulpy as a summer melon. The knight's cloak flapped in the air, in the cold air. Of white wool it had been, bordered in cloth of silver, and partnered with blue stars. Blood and bone were flying everywhere.
Blood and bone flying everywhere. What a mess. So remember when Jon smashes the pillow into the wall of his chambers scattering stuffing everywhere to create a flurry of feathers. Well, here's Woon Woon, who I say stands in for Jon, and he's swinging Sir Patrick's star and blood-speckled corpse against the wall like a morning star, with blood and bone and blue star patterned capes flying everywhere. Blood and bone are weirwood colors, and blue stars are, well, blue stars, symbols of the others and ice moon meteors. So once again, it looks like parallel breaking out of the weirwood net and breaking out of the ice moon symbolism. The highlight is, of course, Woon Woon swinging the corpse against the wall of the tower, being compared to Arya swinging her doll like a morning star. So just as in Jon Snow's moon dream, the thing hitting the wall really seems like a falling comet or star. I mean, it really, really friggin' does. Goddamn. So we're also reminded of Sansa's famous snow castle scene in the Eyrie here, where Sweet Robin swings his doll around, pretending it's a giant, and knocks down part of Sansa's snow castle version of Winterfell. That was both a giant and a doll, and it's knocking down a snowy wall. It's very similar to the Woon Woon scene, and again, it's fairly ominous. So now harken back to the other Woon Woon scene inside the Weirwood Grove, where he awakens like a boulder and then makes the ground shake. And you can really start to get a sense of what the awakening of the dragon locked in ice is all about. Boulders, falling stars, giants awakening in the earth, the wall being struck, and Jon's resurrection. An unbelievable cold, but then an ember in the ashes, igniting a great blaze. Snow that the moon called down, and a moon that snow called down, perhaps. An ice moon apocalypse, the invasion of the others, and a new last hero rising to meet them. He's the blood of the dragon and the blood of the other. And when he wakes up, he'll be our first official in-the-flesh green zombie. He'll want to look to the sky when he does wake up, because he may need to duck. Dun dun! And there you go, folks. Blood of the Other 5. In the books. Oh, yeah. Thanks for the bunghole super chats there, guys. Appreciate that. So what do you think, Quinn?
Good stuff, man. Good stuff.
Woo!
I was engaged the entire time, and that was like over 3 hours.
Yeah, that was 3 hours, man. I held your interest. I held the interest of 140 so people all the way through, which I really appreciate, guys. That means so much. If this had tailed off to like 20 people after an hour, I probably would have had a sad face. But you guys hung with me the whole time. Hopefully I entertained you. Quinn obviously knocked it out of the park with all his quote readings. So I hope you guys enjoyed this live presentation of mythical astronomy. We've got chat emojis going off. Thanks, guys. Woo, I did it. I didn't know if I could do that, but I did do it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, chat, what do you think? How did you like the live presentation of the podcast? Is this something that I should do occasionally? Yeah. Did you enjoy it more or less than the scripted version? And you won't hurt my feelings if you say that you like the scripted version. The scripted version is obviously, we're not scripted, but the produced version, you know, it's cleaner. But this was kind of fun. So yeah, maybe I will do this once in a while. All right, so I'll go ahead and open it for just a couple minutes of questions or remarks from the chat, and then I'll probably bounce out of here. We will be doing a live stream next weekend, probably exact same time, Sunday at 3 Eastern, noon Pacific. Would be the standard Q&A follow-up live stream. And I will be pleased to tell you that Sanrixian is scheduled to join me for some live drawing, unless something unexpected comes up that she didn't know about as of today. But the plan is going forward, I'm going to have basically I'm going to have Sanri on probably most of my live stream Q&As doing live drawing, and then I'll have the Between Two Weirwoods to do discussion panels where I occasionally interrupt people and get shit about it on the internet. And then we'll also be doing the regular podcast. So be sort of mixing it up. Anyways, yes. Black Eyed Lily. 3 hours. So what do you guys think? Are you gonna get some more moon meteors or what?
Moon meteor.
That's basically all of my foreshadowing of the moon disaster, except that there is a bunch more at the Erie itself that I saved because I didn't want to. I want to save the Erie stuff. But other than that, this is pretty much everything. So, yes. I see a couple of people are having problems with super chats. So I've got a PayPal thing. It's mythical astronomy at paypal.me, I believe. And that if you feel like making a direct donation. But I thank everybody who came and showed up because, like I said, I couldn't have done it without you guys cheering me on. So I really appreciate that. And I will be bringing, who do I think John's parents are? Tom Cruise, you, my friend, are my favorite troll. You strike the balance between trolling and good humor just perfectly. Well done, sir. One of my patrons, of course.
I think his parents are Quaith and Robert Baratheon.
Oh, I like that. That's new. Let's shake it up, man. It's good. Cool. So Quinn, you I heard you promoting your stuff earlier, but just tell everyone once again where they can find you and what you got coming.
Check me out on YouTube, Ideas of Ice and Fire. I got all types of fantasy and sci-fi stuff up there. I've got Dune. I've got A Song of Ice and Fire. So here's my channel. I've got A Song of Ice and Fire. I've got Dune. Been doing Mist of Avalon. I just started doing that recently. I have a podcast. LML is on one of the episodes of this podcast up there right now. And yeah, I break down a lot of fantasy, sci-fi books. I've got Stephen King stuff here. So check out my channel if you haven't seen me before. Subscribe, drop a couple likes, and it's been fun coming on the podcast and reading these quotes.
Yeah, dude, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. I could not have done it without someone else to help me here. And you not only helped me, but of course, performed the books in your one-of-a-kind Quinn reading voice, which I've seen a bunch of people in the chat commenting that maybe you should read the next Song of Ice and Fire book.
I know people always say I don't have the training. I cannot do that.
Yeah, it really does take a lot of work to do all the different voices and stuff. What do you think about some of the? Who do you think should read the next books? The Viserys actor, Jorah Mormont, somebody else?
Oh, Jorah Mormont is actually great. I actually listened to one of his George audiobooks for Dying of the Light, actually.
Yeah,
and he's fantastic. So I would not be opposed to him doing it.
Ian Glenn, yeah, totally. Yeah. I would be down with him. Viserys did a great job with the Hedge Knight books too. Mm-hmm. Duncan Egg. Okay, so I've got this one last quote that Wiz the Smith pulled up about the end of the world. So check this out. This is in a Game of Thrones also. Let's see. Perhaps it was all in the knowing. They had ridden past the end of the world. Somehow that changed everything. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound more ominous. The trees pressed close and shut out the light of the setting sun. A thin crust of snow cracked beneath the hooves of their horses, a sound like breaking bones. When the wind set the leaves to rustling, it was like a chilly finger tracing a path up Jon's spine. The wall was at their backs, and only the gods knew what lay ahead. The sun was sinking below the trees when they reached their destination, a small clearing in the deep of the wood where 9 weirwoods grew in a rough circle. So lots of shutting out the sun symbolism, the Grove of 9. We've got breaking bones and the end of the world. Pretty good stuff. So thanks, Wiz the Smith. But in any case, yes, the world is ending, and it's going to have something to do with the war. That's the big takeaway. So anyways, guys, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Quinn. And I'm going to go take a nap.
Yeah.
See you guys later. Cheers.